11 was dying in the alley. Blood pooled beneath her, warm and sticky against the cold concrete. Each breath sent fire through her chest where the bullets had torn through muscle and bone. Above her, the corrupt politician she'd come to kill smiled down with broken teeth. "Your parents." He wheezed, his own life leaking out through the knife wound in his throat. "They screamed your name when we killed them." The words hit harder than the bullets. 11 tried to speak, to curse him, to do something other than lie there like roadkill. But darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, and all she could think about was how she'd failed. 23 years old, and she'd never even avenged the people who mattered most. This wasn't supposed to happen. Marcus had promised her an easy job. Get in, kill Senator Blackwood, get out. Clean and simple. Instead, she'd walked into a warehouse full of hired guns, all of them waiting for her with Marcus's blessing. Her own handler had sold her out to settle some debt with the Torino family. The moon hung fat and silver above the alley, and as 11's heartbeat stuttered to a stop, she could swear she saw a woman's face in its glow. Beautiful and terrible, with eyes like starlight. "Child." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Your destiny is tied to one who will either save or destroy you. Choose wisely when the time comes." 11 tried to ask what the hell that meant, but her world went black. She woke up screaming. The scream died in her throat as she took in her surroundings. Her apartment. Her ratty couch, her second-hand coffee table, her kitchen that barely qualified as a closet with appliances. Everything exactly as she'd left it 3 months ago, before she'd started planning Blackwood's assassination. What the hell? She sat up, running shaking hands over her body. No bullet wounds. No blood. The tank top she wore was clean and whole. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The date glowed up at her, 3 months in the past. The day she'd started surveillance on Blackwood. 11 stared at the phone until her eyes watered. Either she was dead and this was some cosmic joke, or she'd been given the rarest gift in the world, a second chance. She chose to believe in the chance. Within an hour, she'd burned everything. Every fake ID, every piece of equipment, every reminder of the life that had killed her. She watched 23 years of death and violence turn to ash in her building's dumpster, and for the first time since her parents died, she felt something like peace. "My name is Eve," she said to the empty apartment. "Eve Chen. And I'm done killing people." 2 weeks later, Eve was slinging drinks at Eclipse, the kind of upscale bar where politicians and crime bosses rubbed elbows over $30 cocktails. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she needed work that paid in cash and didn't ask too many questions. "You're good at this," said Danny, the day manager, watching her mix a perfect Manhattan. "Most people take months to work a crowd like you do." Eve smiled and didn't mention that reading people had been the difference between life and death in her previous career. "I'm a quick learner." Eclipse drew money, and money drew dangerous people. She'd spotted at least 3 mob enforcers, a loan shark, and someone who was definitely ATF trying to look casual at table 6. But it was honest work, and honest work felt like sunlight after 20 years in the shadows. Her shift was nearly over when he walked in. Everything about him screamed predator. The way he moved, fluid and controlled. The way his eyes swept the room, cataloging threats and exits. The way every conversation in his vicinity died to whispers. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it and a face that belonged on magazine covers. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, pale green, almost silver, like moonlight on water. Those eyes found hers across the crowded bar, and Eve felt something deep in her chest shift and settle. Like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "Your destiny is tied to one who will either save or destroy you." The moon goddess's words echoed in her memory as the man approached the bar. Up close, she could see the careful control in his movements, the alertness that never quite relaxed. A fellow predator recognizing another. "What can I get you?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Whiskey." "Neat." His voice was rough velvet, the kind that could charm secrets from a priest or coax a confession from a killer. You're new. It wasn't a question. Started 2 weeks ago. I'm Eve. Gabriel. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't ask. In this business, names were earned, not given. You like it here? It's honest work. She poured 3 fingers of their best whiskey into a glass and slid it across the bar. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and she felt electricity race up her arm. From the way his pupils dilated slightly, he felt it too. Honest work. Gabriel smiled, and it was all sharp edges and dark promises. That's rare in this neighborhood. So are good customers. She leaned against the bar, drawn to him despite every instinct screaming that he was dangerous. What do you do, Gabriel? I solve problems. The simple answer told her everything and nothing. In her old life, she'd have pressed for details, catalogued his tells, mapped his weaknesses. But Eve wasn't an assassin anymore. Eve was just a bartender making conversation with a customer who looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the room. Must be complicated problems, she said. The kind that matter. He took a sip of whiskey, never taking his eyes off her face. What about you, Eve? What did you do before honest work? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. She could lie, spin some story about college and dead-end jobs. Or she could tell him the truth and watch him walk away. I hurt people, she said quietly. For money. For revenge. For 23 years, I was very good at it. Gabriel went very still. Not the stillness of shock, but of a predator recognizing prey, or an equal. Past tense, he asked. Past tense. He nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. Everyone deserves a second chance. Do they? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Even people who've done terrible things? Especially them. Gabriel finished his whiskey and set the glass down with careful precision. The question is whether they're brave enough to take it. Eve stared at him, at this man who'd walked into her new life like he belonged there, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She thought she was done with danger, with the kind of people who solved problems with violence and spoke in riddles. But as Gabriel's pale green eyes held hers, she realized her second chance might be more complicated than she'd planned. Same time tomorrow, he asked, dropping a 20 on the bar. I'll be here. Gabriel smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Good. I have a feeling we have a lot to talk about. He walked away with that same fluid grace, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. Eve watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs. Danny appeared at her elbow, whistling low. You know who that was? Gabriel. She pocketed the 20, noting it was twice what the drink cost. Problem solver. Gabriel Torino, Danny corrected, and Eve's blood turned to ice. He runs the supernatural community in this city. Werewolves, vampires, all the things that go bump in the night. They say he's the strongest alpha this side of the Mississippi. Eve's hand went instinctively to her throat, where phantom claws had never touched her. Werewolf. She'd served drinks to a werewolf alpha, felt that electric connection, and lived to tell about it. Your destiny is tied to one who will either save or destroy you. As she closed out her register and cleaned glasses with shaking hands, Eve couldn't decide if the moon goddess had given her a gift or a curse. But tomorrow, she'd be here. And so would Gabriel Torino. Whatever came next, she'd face it head-on. After all, she'd already died once. How much worse could a werewolf be? Chapter 2. 3 weeks into her new life, Eve had almost convinced herself she could be normal. She'd fallen into a rhythm at Eclipse, arrive at 4, prep the bar, smile at customers who looked through her like she was part of the furniture. Wealthy people had a talent for making service staff invisible, and for the first time in her life, Eve was grateful to disappear. No one asked questions. No one wanted to know her story. She mixed their drinks, took their money, and went home to her quiet apartment where no one was trying to kill her. It was everything she'd wanted. So why did she feel so hollow? The answer walked through Eclipse's doors every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 9:15, ordered the same whiskey neat, and watched her with eyes like pale green fire. Evening, Gabriel. She already had his drink ready, the expensive stuff they kept on the top shelf. 3 weeks of the same routine. Alexander, he corrected quietly, accepting the glass. Gabriel's my last name. I prefer Alexander. Heat crept up her neck. 3 weeks of calling him by his surname like some kind of employee. Alexander. Sorry. Don't be. His smile was softer tonight, less predator and more man. I never corrected you before. Why now? He took a sip of whiskey, considering. Because I'd like you to know me. The real me, not just the reputation. The real him. Eve glanced around the bar, busy enough that their conversation wouldn't be overheard, but not so busy she couldn't spare a few minutes. And who's the real you? Someone who owns 3 restaurants, 2 shipping companies, and a security firm. Alexander's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was reciting a grocery list. Someone who hasn't taken a real vacation in 5 years and drinks his coffee black because he's usually too busy to add cream. Sounds successful. And legitimate, which surprised her more than it should have. Most supernatural creatures she'd known worked in gray areas. The security firm, what kind of security? The kind that keeps people safe. His eyes met hers. The kind that sometimes requires unconventional methods. There it was. The danger she sensed around him, acknowledged but not explained. Eve nodded, understanding the boundaries of the conversation. They could talk around the edges of their real selves, but some truths were still too sharp to touch. What about you? Alexander leaned against the bar, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. What does Eve Chen do when she's not mixing perfect Manhattans? She reads terrible romance novels and orders too much takeout. The answer came easier than expected. It was even mostly true. She's trying to figure out who she wants to be when she grows up. And how's that going? Eve wiped down a glass that didn't need cleaning, buying time. Some days better than others. It's harder than I thought, starting over. The hardest things usually are. Alexander's voice went gentle, and when she looked up, his expression was understanding. Not pity, understanding. Like he knew exactly what it felt like to build a new life from the ashes of an old one. The moment stretched between them, loaded with things neither of them was ready to say. Then someone at table 12 signaled for another round, and Eve had to look away. I should go. Alexander finished his whiskey and stood. I'll see you Friday. It wasn't a question, and Eve found herself nodding. Friday. She watched him leave, noting the way other patrons automatically gave him space, the respectful nods from the security team by the door. Alexander Torino carried authority like other people carried wallets, naturally, without having to think about it. You're playing with fire, Danny appeared beside her, following her gaze. I'm taking his order and making conversation. Eve turned back to her bottles, arranging them by height even though they were already perfectly organized. It's called customer service. It's called flirting with the most dangerous man in the city. Danny's voice dropped. That's not customer service, Eve. That's something else entirely. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Eve told herself it was just curiosity. Alexander intrigued her, the contrast between his legitimate businesses and the supernatural reputation, the way he looked at her like she was a puzzle worth solving. It had nothing to do with the way her pulse quickened when he walked into the room, or how their brief conversations had become the highlight of her week. Nothing at all. He arrived at 9:15 as always, but tonight felt different. The bar was quieter, most of the usual crowd had cleared out early, and when Alexander took his usual seat, his attention was completely focused on her. Busy night, he asked, accepting his whiskey. Dead, actually. Good tips, though. Eve settled against the bar across from him, close enough to talk without shouting over the music. How's the security business? Complicated. Alexander swirled his drink, ice clinking against glass. Had to resolve a territorial dispute today. Nothing violent, he added quickly, reading her expression. Just very loud negotiations between parties who don't particularly like each other. Werewolf politics. The words slipped out before Eve could stop them. Alexander went still, his hand freezing halfway to his mouth. Danny mentioned what you are, she said quickly. The night we met. I'm not, it doesn't bother me. Doesn't it? Alexander set his glass down carefully. Most people would be afraid. Most people haven't lived the life I have. Eve met his eyes steadily. Shapeshifters are just another kind of dangerous. I've dealt with dangerous before. And how did that work out for you? The question was quiet, but it hit like a slap. Eve's throat tightened as she remembered the alley, the blood, the feeling of her life leaking away. It killed me. Alexander's eyebrows rose. Metaphorically? Literally. The admission came out flat, matter of fact. I died 3 months ago. Someone gave me a second chance, and here I am. She expected him to laugh, or call her crazy, or at least look skeptical. Instead, Alexander studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex equation. The moon goddess, he said finally. Eve's heart stopped. How did you? Lucky guess. But his smile was knowing. She's been more active lately. Granting second chances to people she thinks deserve them. The question is, what did you do to earn her attention? I was an assassin. The words felt strange in her mouth, too honest and too dangerous. For 20 years. The night I died, I was trying to kill someone who'd murdered my parents. Alexander absorbed this information like she'd told him she used to be an accountant. Did you succeed? We killed each other. Eve's laugh was bitter. Very Romeo and Juliet, except with more bullets and less poetry. And now you're a bartender. Now I'm trying to be human. The confession scraped her throat raw. I want to be someone who builds things instead of destroying them. Someone who... She gestured helplessly. Someone normal. Normal is overrated. Alexander reached across the bar and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm, and she could feel the strength in his fingers. Normal people don't get second chances from ancient goddesses. Normal people don't need them. No, he agreed. They don't. The touch of his hand sent electricity up her arm, and Eve felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. This was dangerous territory, not just because he was a werewolf alpha, but because he made her want things she'd thought she'd given up on. Connection. Trust. Something that might eventually turn into love. Last call, Danny announced, and Eve jerked her hand back like she'd been burned. The spell broken, Alexander straightened and pulled out his wallet. I should let you get back to work. Right. Of course. Eve busied herself with wiping down surfaces that were already clean, hyper-aware of his presence as he settled his tab. The bar was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers nursing their final drinks. Eve. Alexander's voice stopped her mid-wipe. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Somewhere that's not here? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Eve looked at him, really looked, and saw not the alpha wolf or the businessman, but just a man asking a woman he was interested in to spend time with him. I'd like that, she heard herself say. Alexander's smile was brilliant. Tomorrow? There's a place on 5th Street that makes excellent espresso. Tomorrow's my day off. Perfect. 2 o'clock. Eve nodded, not trusting her voice. Alexander left his usual generous tip and headed for the door, but stopped just before reaching it. Eve? He turned back, and his expression was serious. Thank you. For trusting me with your story. Then he was gone, leaving Eve staring after him with her heart hammering against her ribs. But Alexander didn't show up for coffee. Eve waited for an hour at the cafe on 5th Street, nursing an overpriced latte and checking her phone every 30 seconds. No message, no call, no explanation. Just empty silence where their tentative first date should have been. She told herself it didn't matter. Men disappointed women every day. It was practically a universal constant. Alexander Torino was no different from any other guy who'd lost interest when things got too real. Except it did matter, more than it should have. Eve had opened up to him, shared pieces of herself she'd never told another living soul. She'd trusted him with her story, and he'd vanished like smoke. By the time she got to work that evening, she'd armored herself in professional indifference. If Alexander showed up for his usual Friday drink, she'd serve him with perfect politeness and nothing more. If he didn't, she'd count it as a lesson learned. He didn't show. The weekend passed in a blur of routine, work, sleep, take-out dinners eaten alone while staring at her phone. Monday came and went. Tuesday arrived, and Eve found herself watching the door like a pathetic cliché, waiting for 9:15 to come and go without him. It was nearly closing time Wednesday when he finally appeared. Alexander looked like he'd been through hell. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "Whiskey," he said without preamble, sliding onto his usual stool. Eve poured the drink and set it in front of him without a word. He knocked it back in one swallow and gestured for another. "I owe you an explanation." "No, you don't." Eve kept her voice level, professional. "You don't owe me anything. I had to leave town. Family emergency." Alexander's eyes met hers, and she saw something desperate there. "I wanted to call, but it's fine." The lie came easily. "We barely know each other." "That's not true and you know it." Alexander leaned forward, his voice urgent. "What happened between us?" "Nothing happened between us." Eve turned away, busying herself with inventory. "You're a customer. I'm a bartender. That's all." She felt him watching her, felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch. When she finally looked back, his expression was unreadable. "You're right," he said quietly. "That's all we are." He left a 20 on the bar and walked away without another word. The rain started just as Eve's shift ended, a steady downpour that turned the city streets into rivers. She pulled her jacket tighter and hurried toward the subway, already dreading the soggy walk from the station to her apartment. "Eve." She spun around, water streaming down her face. Alexander stood under a streetlight, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. He was soaked through, like he'd been standing there for hours. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the rain dripping from his dark hair. "I lied. About the family emergency." Eve's heart clenched. "Then why?" "Because I'm not good for you." The words came out rough, like they'd been scraped from his throat. "Because I'm exactly the kind of dangerous you're trying to get away from. That's my choice to make." "Is it?" Alexander moved closer, and Eve could smell rain and something uniquely him. "You said you wanted to be normal. I'm the opposite of normal. I'm the alpha of the largest werewolf pack in the tri-state area. I have enemies who would hurt you just to get to me. I make decisions that cost people their lives. I've made those decisions too." Eve reached out, her fingers finding the lapel of his coat. "I told you what I was. What you were. Not what you are." Alexander caught her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "You're trying to build something clean and good. I'll only drag you back into the darkness." "What if I don't want clean and good?" The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "What if I want you?" Something shifted in Alexander's expression, something hungry and desperate and barely controlled. "Eve." She kissed him. It was supposed to be soft, a gentle pressure of lips against lips. Instead, it ignited like a match to gasoline. Alexander's arms came around her, pulling her against him with bruising intensity. She could taste rain and whiskey and something wild, something that made her blood sing with recognition. This was what she'd been missing. Not just desire, but the feeling of being truly seen by someone who understood the darkness she carried. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Your place or mine?" Alexander's voice was rough with want. "Mine's closer." They barely made it through the door before they were on each other again. Alexander pushed her against the wall, his mouth finding the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. Eve gasped, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, and felt 20 years of careful control shatter like glass. This wasn't gentle or romantic. This was need, raw and desperate, two people who'd been walking through the world alone, finding each other in the dark. Alexander's hands were everywhere, mapping the curve of her waist, the line of her throat, the sensitive skin just below her ear that made her arch against him with a soft cry. Clothes disappeared in a frenzy of urgent touches. Eve's jacket hit the floor, followed by Alexander's shirt, and then his hands were on her bare skin and she forgot how to think. "Are you sure?" he asked, his forehead pressed against hers, giving her one last chance to change her mind. Eve answered by pulling him toward the bedroom. They fell onto her bed in a tangle of limbs and whispered promises. Alexander worshipped her body like it was something precious, his touch reverent despite the hunger burning in his eyes. When he finally moved inside her, Eve cried out, overwhelmed by the rightness of it, the way they fit together like they'd been made for this moment. Afterward, they lay wrapped around each other, hearts still racing. Alexander traced lazy patterns on her back, and Eve let herself imagine this could be the beginning of something real. "Stay," she whispered against his shoulder. "Until morning," he promised. But when dawn broke through her curtains, Alexander was gone. In his place was $10,000 in crisp hundreds, and a note written in his precise handwriting, "For services rendered." Eve stared at the money until the numbers blurred. Not because of the amount, 10,000 was more than she made in 3 months at Eclipse. But because of what it meant. What it reduced her to. She thought last night was about connection, about two people finding something real in a world full of pretense. But to Alexander, she was just another transaction. A one-night stand with a generous tip. The money felt like a slap, like every cruel assumption about what she was worth rolled into crisp bills. Eve swept it off the nightstand, watching it scatter across her bedroom floor, and fought the urge to scream. She'd been an assassin for 20 years. She'd killed for money, information, revenge. But somehow, this felt like the most degrading thing that had ever happened to her. 20 minutes later, she was dressed and heading for the door, leaving the money where it had fallen. Let Alexander keep his guilt payment. She had her pride, and that was worth more than any amount of cash. The hotel lobby was elegant and understated, the kind of place that catered to people who had money but didn't need to flaunt it. Eve pushed through the revolving doors and stepped onto the sidewalk, already planning her route to the subway. She made it exactly 3 steps before the black SUVs surrounded her. 4 vehicles, moving with military precision to box her in. Tinted windows made it impossible to see inside, but Eve didn't need to see to know she was in trouble. Her old instincts kicked in, cataloging exits and weapons, calculating odds of survival. 0. The odds were 0. The rear door of the closest SUV opened, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome 30 years ago. Now it just looked cold. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "We need to talk." Eve's blood turned to ice. Her new life, her fresh start, her carefully constructed anonymity, all of it crumbling in the space of a heartbeat. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. The man smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "No confusion at all. We know exactly who you are, 11. The question is, do you know who we are?" Eve looked at the SUVs, at the men with their hands resting casually near concealed weapons, at the trap closing around her with surgical precision. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think I'm starting to figure that out." Chapter 3. The silver-haired man stepped closer, and Eve's blood turned to Arctic ice. Even 20 years older, even with lines carved deep around his eyes and silver threading through hair that had once been dark, she knew that face. had seen it in nightmares for most of her adult life. "Hello, Douglas." Her voice came out steady, professional. The same tone she'd used to report successful kills. "You're looking old." Douglas Crane smiled, and it was exactly as cold as she remembered. "The years have been kinder to you, 11. Death seems to agree with you." The words hit like physical blows. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew about the alley, about the moon goddess, about her second chance. Eve's mind raced through possibilities, supernatural contacts, inside information, pure dumb luck, but came up empty. "I don't know what you're talking about." The lie felt weak even to her. "Please." Douglas gestured, and two men in dark suits flanked her. Not grabbing, not yet, but making their presence known. "I've been watching you for weeks. Following your charming transformation from feared assassin to minimum wage bartender. Tell me, how does it feel to serve drinks to the same kind of people you used to kill?" Eve's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to run, to do something other than stand here trading barbs with the man who'd destroyed her childhood. But the SUVs formed a perfect perimeter, and she could see at least 6 armed men positioned around the hotel entrance. "What do you want, Douglas?" "The same thing I've always wanted." His smile widened, showing teeth that were too white to be natural. "Your complete and total dedication to the Crane organization." The Crane organization. 20 years, and he was still calling his collection of killers and thieves an organization, like they were some kind of legitimate corporation. Eve almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the situation. "I'm retired." "Retirement is for people who've earned it." Douglas pulled out his phone, swiped to a photo, and held it up. "Do you remember Kira?" Eve's heart stopped. The photo showed a girl, maybe 16 now, with the same dark hair and defiant eyes Eve remembered from 5 years ago. Kira Martinez, whose older brother had tried to muscle in on Crane territory and paid for it with his life. Eve had been sent to clean up loose ends, which meant killing the sister who might want revenge someday. Instead, she'd helped Kira disappear. Fake papers, new identity, enough money to start over somewhere Douglas would never find her. It had been one of the few decent things Eve had done in 20 years of killing, and she'd never regretted it. Until now. "She's grown up beautifully, hasn't she?" Douglas's voice was conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "Graduated high school last month. Planning to study medicine at NYU in the fall. Such a bright future ahead of her. If you hurt her." "I won't have to." Douglas pocketed the phone. "As long as you're reasonable. See, I've had some setbacks recently. Lost several good people to the Torino werewolves and their allies. Business has been challenging." Eve felt something cold settle in her stomach. "The Torinos. You know them?" Douglas's eyebrows rose with feigned surprise. "Of course you do. You've been fucking their alpha, haven't you? Tell me, does Alexander know what you used to do for a living?" The casual vulgarity made her flinch, but it was the knowledge that hit hardest. Douglas knew about Alexander. Which meant he'd been watching more closely than she'd realized. "Leave him out of this." "Oh, I don't think so." Douglas gestured, and one of his men opened the rear door of the closest SUV. "Get in, 11. We have work to discuss." Eve looked at the open door, at Douglas's expectant face, at the men positioned to grab her if she refused. She thought about Kira, somewhere in the city, unaware that her past had caught up with her. She thought about the girl's bright future, about medicine and healing instead of killing. She got in the car. The warehouse looked exactly like every other Crane safe house, industrial, anonymous, and designed for easy cleanup. Douglas led her through a maze of shipping containers to a small office that smelled like coffee and gun oil. "Sit." He gestured to a chair across from a metal desk. "We have business to discuss." Eve remained standing. "Let me see her." "All in good time." Douglas settled behind the desk like he was conducting a normal business meeting. "First, let's talk about your new assignment." I told you, I'm retired. And I told you retirement isn't an option. Douglas opened a laptop, turned it toward her. The screen showed security footage of Eclipse, with timestamps from the last 3 weeks. I know where you work, where you live, what you eat for breakfast. I know you've been playing house with the werewolf Alpha, and I know exactly how much you'd lose if your new life suddenly became very public. The threat was crystal clear. Eve's carefully constructed identity as a normal bartender would evaporate the moment Douglas released even a fraction of what he knew. Alexander would learn the truth, along with everyone else at Eclipse. Her fresh start would be over before it really began. What's the job? Douglas smiled like she'd given him a gift. Simple, really. Seduction and theft. There's a man with something I need, a briefcase containing $2 million in bearer bonds. You're going to get close to him, gain his trust, and steal it. That's not my skill set. Eve kept her voice level. I'm an assassin, not a thief. You're whatever I need you to be. Douglas's voice turned sharp. Besides, this target has particular tastes. He likes dangerous women. Smart women. Women who might actually be able to kill him if they chose to. Something about his tone made Eve's skin crawl. Who is he? Douglas turned the laptop back toward himself, typed for a moment, then spun it around again. Alexander Torino. The world tilted sideways. Eve stared at the screen, at Alexander's professional headshot beside a detailed dossier that knew far too much about his businesses, his pack, his personal life. Every conversation they'd had at Eclipse was suddenly suspect, every moment of connection tainted by the possibility that it had all been orchestrated. Interesting coincidence, isn't it? Douglas leaned back in his chair. You falling for the very man I need you to rob. This isn't a coincidence. Eve's voice was barely a whisper. You planned this. Of course I did. Douglas looked genuinely pleased with himself. I've been tracking your movements since the night you died and came back. When I realized you'd found the Torino Alpha attractive, it seemed like fate was finally working in my favor. Eve felt sick. Every moment with Alexander, their conversations, their connection, their passionate night together, had been part of Douglas's game. She thought she was choosing her own path, building something real, but she'd been dancing to his tune all along. He paid you, didn't he? Douglas continued, oblivious to her internal breakdown. $10,000 for a single night. Generous, even for someone of your talents. The money. Alexander's note. For services rendered. It hadn't been a dismissal or an insult. It had been payment for a job Douglas had assigned. Alexander had known who she was from the beginning, had played his part in whatever game Douglas was running. The briefcase is in his penthouse safe, Douglas said, pulling out a manila folder. Floor plans, security codes, everything you need. He'll be at the Meridian Hotel tonight for a business dinner. Perfect opportunity to get close. Eve took the folder with numb fingers. The weight of it felt like a death sentence. And if I refuse? Then Kira dies, your new identity becomes front-page news, and you spend the rest of your very short life running from every enemy you've ever made. Douglas's smile was arctic. But you won't refuse. Because despite everything, you're still the same woman who saved a child's life instead of following orders. You won't let her die for your freedom. He was right, and they both knew it. Eve looked at the folder, at the pictures of Alexander's building, and felt the last of her hope crumble. I'll need proof that she's alive. Douglas pulled out his phone again, this time showing a video. Kira, very much alive, sitting in what looked like a comfortable apartment. She was reading a book, completely unaware she was being filmed. No visible restraints, no signs of abuse, but the message was clear. She's safe as long as you cooperate, Douglas said. Fail me, and she disappears forever. Eve closed the folder and stood. I'll need my equipment. Already taken care of. Douglas gestured to a black duffel bag in the corner. Your old gear, plus some new toys. Consider it a welcome back gift. The bag looked exactly like the one she'd burned weeks ago, full of the tools that had made her one of the most feared assassins on the East Coast. Seeing it felt like looking at her own grave. How long do I have? Tonight. The dinner starts at 8, he'll be back to his penthouse by 11. You have until dawn to get the briefcase and disappear. Eve picked up the bag, surprised by how familiar the weight felt in her hands. Like muscle memory she couldn't quite shake. Douglas? She turned back at the door. When this is over, we're done. No more jobs, no more favors. You let me go, and you never contact me again. Of course. His smile said otherwise. Though I have a feeling you'll find civilian life rather dull after tonight. The Meridian Hotel was the kind of place where senators met arms dealers and nobody asked uncomfortable questions. Eve watched from the bar as Alexander held court at a corner table, surrounded by men in expensive suits who laughed too loudly at his jokes. She'd changed into a black cocktail dress that showed enough skin to be distracting but not so much as to be obvious. Her hair was up, revealing the line of her neck, and she'd applied her makeup with the precision of a surgeon. The result was sophisticated, dangerous, and completely different from the casual bartender Alexander knew. He hadn't noticed her yet. Too busy with his business dinner, discussing shipping routes and territorial agreements in the coded language powerful men used when they thought they were being subtle. Eve nursed her martini and waited, every nerve on high alert. The equipment bag was in her hotel room upstairs, along with the floor plans and security codes Douglas had provided. Everything she needed to rob the man who'd become the center of her carefully rebuilt world. At 10:30, Alexander's dinner companions began to leave. Handshakes and shoulder claps, the ritual of men sealing deals that would probably cost someone their life. Eve finished her drink and made her move. Fancy meeting you here. She appeared at his elbow like a ghost, close enough to smell his cologne. Alexander turned, and his expression went through several rapid changes. Surprise, recognition, something that might have been guilt, and finally a careful neutrality that told her everything she needed to know. He'd been expecting her. Eve. His voice was steady, controlled. You look beautiful. Thank you. She slid into the seat across from him, crossed her legs, and watched his eyes track the movement. I was hoping we could talk. About what? About last night. About the money you left. She leaned forward, letting her dress gap slightly. About what it meant. Alexander's jaw tightened. I thought I was clear. Crystal. Eve's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. But I'm a little confused about the payment structure. Was it a one-time fee, or am I now on retainer? The words hit their mark. Alexander's carefully controlled expression cracked, revealing something like pain underneath. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. No? Eve tilted her head. How was it supposed to happen, Alexander? Or should I ask Douglas? The name dropped between them like a bomb. Alexander went completely still, his pupils dilating as predator instincts kicked in. Around them, the hotel's background noise faded as other supernatural creatures sensed the sudden tension. I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, Alexander said quietly. Your penthouse? Eve's voice was honey over poison. I'd love to see how the other half lives. Alexander signaled for the check, his movements precise and controlled. But Eve could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched slightly before relaxing. He knew this was a trap, but he was walking into it anyway. Because he wanted to hear what she had to say. Or because he thought he could control the situation. Either way, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Alexander's penthouse was everything she'd expected, sleek, expensive, and designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that probably cost more per month than most people made in a year. The furniture was minimalist but clearly custom, and the art on the walls looked like it belonged in a museum. Drink? Alexander moved to a well-stocked bar, his movements casual despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. Whiskey. Meat. Eve prowled around the living room, noting exit points and potential weapons. Old habits died hard. This is quite a place. Business must be good. It has its rewards. Alexander poured 2 glasses, turned to face her. Now, what's this about Douglas? You tell me. Eve accepted the whiskey but didn't drink. When did he first contact you? 3 weeks ago. Alexander's honesty surprised her. Right after you started working at Eclipse. And what did he want? For me to get close to you. Learn your habits, your weaknesses. Build trust. Alexander took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her face. He said you were dangerous, that you might be planning something against his organization. And you believed him? I believed he was telling me part of the truth. Alexander moved closer, and Eve fought the urge to step back. What I couldn't figure out was why he wanted you watched instead of just killed. Because I have something he needs. The admission tasted like ash. And because he knows exactly which buttons to push to make me cooperate. What does he have on you? Eve set her untouched whiskey on the coffee table and turned to face him fully. A 16-year-old girl who doesn't deserve to die for my mistakes. Understanding flickered across Alexander's features. So he sent you here tonight. To steal a briefcase containing 2 million in bearer bonds. Eve's voice was matter-of-fact. Apparently it's in your safe. Alexander nodded slowly. And if you don't deliver? Kira dies, my new identity becomes public knowledge, and I go back to being Douglas's personal weapon. Eve shrugged like it didn't matter, like her heart wasn't breaking with every word. Pretty standard leverage, really. I see. Alexander finished his whiskey and set the glass aside. And are you planning to rob me, Eve? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Eve looked at this man who'd held her like she was precious, who'd made her believe in second chances, who'd paid her like a whore and broken her heart in the same gesture. I don't know, she said honestly. Are you planning to stop me? Alexander's smile was sharp and predatory. That depends. Are you going to try to kill me when I do? Eve moved. 20 years of training took over, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. She grabbed a crystal paperweight from the coffee table, hurled it at Alexander's head, and followed it with her body. He dodged the paperweight with inhuman speed, but wasn't fast enough to avoid her tackle. They went down hard, Eve's knee driving toward his solar plexus while her hands reached for his throat. Alexander caught her wrists, rolled, and suddenly she was pinned beneath him with supernatural strength holding her in place. Impressive, he said, not even breathing hard. Douglas wasn't exaggerating about your skills. Eve bucked against his hold, trying to break free. Let me go. I don't think so. Alexander's grip tightened. Not until we finish our conversation. There's nothing left to talk about. Eve forced herself to go limp, to stop fighting. You played your part, I played mine. Now let me do what I came here to do and we can both move on with our lives. What if I don't want to move on? The question caught her off guard. Eve stared up at him, searching his face for signs of deception. What? What if I told you I want to offer you a job? Alexander's voice was serious, intent. Better pay than Douglas, better working conditions, and full protection from your past. I'd say you're insane. Am I? Alexander shifted his weight but didn't release her. You're wasted on Douglas, Eve. A killer of your caliber working for a small-time crime boss. It's like using a Ferrari to deliver pizza. I'm not a killer anymore. The words came out automatically, a mantra she'd been repeating for weeks. No? Alexander's smile was knowing. Then explain what just happened here. You moved like a professional, fought like someone who's killed more people than she can count. You can play bartender all you want, but underneath that nice girl act, you're exactly what you've always been. The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Despite everything, her second chance, her new identity, her desperate desire to be normal, the first real threat had stripped away her pretenses in seconds. She was still 11, still Douglas's weapon, still a killer. I can offer you something Douglas never could, Alexander continued. A chance to use your skills for something that matters. My people protect this city from threats Douglas can't even imagine. Vampires, rogue werewolves, things that go bump in the night and hunt innocent people. And in exchange? You work for me. Exclusively. Alexander's eyes were intense, hypnotic. No more Douglas, no more small-time crime jobs. You become part of something bigger. Eve stared up at him, her mind racing. It was a lifeline she hadn't expected, a way out of the trap Douglas had set. But it was also exactly what she'd been trying to escape, a life defined by violence and danger. What about Kira? I'll handle Douglas. Alexander's voice was flat, final. The girl will be safe. And my past? Stays buried. As far as the world knows, you're Eve Chen, and you work for me now. Alexander paused. But I need an answer tonight. Douglas won't wait forever, and neither will I. Eve looked into his pale green eyes and saw her future hanging in the balance. She could refuse, try to complete Douglas's job, and hope he kept his word about letting her go. Or she could trust the man who'd already betrayed her once, who might be offering salvation or simply trading one master for another. Before I answer, she said quietly, I need to know something. What? Last night. The money, the note. Eve met his eyes. Was any of it real? Alexander's expression went completely still. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. That's the only thing that was. Before Eve could respond, before she could process what his words meant, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the penthouse in red. Alexander was on his feet instantly, his body shifting into combat mode as his supernatural senses kicked in. We're not alone, he said quietly. Eve rolled to her feet, every nerve on high alert. How many? 6. Maybe 7. Alexander moved to the windows, keeping low. Professional. They knew exactly when to cut the power. Douglas. Eve felt ice form in her veins. He's not waiting for me to deliver. No. Alexander's smile was all teeth. He's decided to collect in person. The sound of the elevator opening echoed from the hallway. Footsteps, measured and careful. Men who knew their business and weren't trying to hide their approach. The briefcase, Eve said. Where is it? Alexander looked at her for a long moment, something like trust flickering in his eyes. Safe. Behind the Monet. Get it. I'll handle. No. Alexander caught her arm. We handle this together. Douglas brought a war to my territory. That makes it my fight too. The footsteps were getting closer. Eve could hear them spreading out, taking positions. Professional tactics, military precision. Douglas had brought his best people. Eve. Alexander's voice was urgent. Whatever happens, whatever you see, trust me. Can you do that? She looked at him, this man who'd lied to her, used her, broken her heart, and just offered her a way out of hell. This werewolf alpha who'd made her feel human for the first time in 20 years. Yeah, she said. I can do that. Alexander smiled, and his canines were longer than they'd been a moment ago. Good. Because things are about to get very interesting. The penthouse door exploded inward, and Douglas's voice echoed through the darkness. Hello, 11. Time to come home. Chapter 4. Yes. The words slipped out before Eve could second-guess herself, before she could analyze all the ways Alexander's offer could go wrong. In the red emergency lighting of his penthouse, with Douglas's men closing in, she made the choice that would define the rest of her life. I accept. Alexander's smile was fierce and grateful. Then welcome to the Torino pack, Eve Chen. The penthouse door exploded inward, and everything went to hell. 3 men in tactical gear poured through the entrance, assault rifles raised. Eve dove left, Alexander rolled right, and the coffee table where they'd been standing disintegrated in a hail of gunfire. 11. Douglas's voice echoed from the hallway. Let's not make this more difficult than necessary. Alexander's growl rumbled through the darkness, and Eve caught the flash of amber eyes as his wolf rose to the surface. Stay low, he whispered. And try not to kill anyone unless you have to. Why not? Eve grabbed a shard of broken glass from the coffee table, tested its weight. Because we're not them. Alexander's voice was grim. And I need you to remember that. Eve nodded, understanding the distinction even as bullets shattered the windows behind them. This wasn't about killing, it was about survival with honor intact. What followed was brutal and efficient. Alexander moved like liquid death, using supernatural speed to disarm the first gunman before the man could scream. Eve went for the second, her makeshift weapon finding the gap between his vest and helmet. Not fatal, but enough to drop him. The third man got smart and retreated to the hallway, shouting orders to reinforcements. Within seconds, the penthouse was swarming with Douglas's people. The safe, Alexander called out, tossing her a key. Get the briefcase. I'll handle them. Eve sprinted toward the bedroom where she'd spotted the Monet during her earlier reconnaissance. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of Alexander's war, growls, screams, and the wet thud of bodies hitting expensive furniture. The painting swung aside to reveal a state-of-the-art safe. Eve's fingers flew over the keypad, muscle memory from 20 years of breaking and entering taking over. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside were documents, cash, and a silver briefcase that looked exactly like Douglas had described. Eve grabbed it, along with a few other items that might prove useful, and turned to find Douglas himself blocking the bedroom doorway. Hello, sweetheart. His gun was trained on her chest, steady and professional. I was hoping we could avoid this unpleasantness. Were you? Eve hefted the briefcase. Because bringing a tactical team to steal from a werewolf alpha seems pretty unpleasant to me. Mr. Torino has something that belongs to me. Several things, actually. Douglas stepped into the room, keeping his weapon raised. Including you. I don't belong to anyone. Eve shifted her weight, calculating distances and angles. Not anymore. Don't you? Douglas's smile was cold. Because from where I'm standing, you just traded one master for another. At least I was honest about what you were. The words stung because there was truth in them. Eve had gone from Douglas's weapon to Alexander's employee in the span of 10 minutes. How was that freedom? The difference, she said quietly, is that I chose this time. Douglas laughed. Choice. How wonderfully naive. His finger tightened on the trigger. Hand over the briefcase, 11. Last warning. Eve looked at the gun, at Douglas's face, at the path to the door. In her peripheral vision, she could see Alexander's shadow moving through the living room, still fighting his way through the assault team. She made her choice. Eve hurled the briefcase at Douglas's head and dove sideways as his gun erupted. The bullet took a chunk out of the wall where she'd been standing, and then Alexander was there, moving with inhuman speed to disarm the older man. Douglas hit the floor hard, his weapon skittering across expensive hardwood. Alexander stood over him, breathing hard, his eyes still amber with wolf light. Your men are down, Alexander said conversationally. Not dead, but they'll need medical attention. I suggest you collect them and leave my territory. Douglas struggled to sit up, blood trickling from a split lip. This isn't over. No, Alexander agreed. It's not. But the next time you bring violence to my home, I won't be so generous. His voice dropped to a growl. And Douglas? If you threaten Eve again, I'll forget we have a business relationship. Douglas looked between them, his expression calculating. Business relationship? Alexander's smile was all teeth. Did you think I didn't know what you wanted the briefcase for? Corporate espionage is a messy business, but sometimes necessary. He glanced at Eve. Sometimes it requires particular skills. Eve felt something cold settle in her stomach. Alexander was selling her services to Douglas, making it look like she was still his weapon while secretly working for the pack. It was brilliant, dangerous, and completely insane. She reports to me, Douglas said, struggling to his feet. Any jobs you give her, I approve first. Of course. Alexander's voice was perfectly reasonable. We wouldn't want any conflicts of interest. Douglas looked suspicious, but he nodded. The briefcase. Alexander gestured to where it had fallen near the dresser. As promised. Though I hope you'll be more careful with future transactions. Douglas retrieved the briefcase, his movements stiff with pain and wounded pride. We'll be in touch, 11. Eve said nothing, just watched as he limped out of the bedroom. A few minutes later, she heard the elevator doors close. Well, Alexander said into the sudden silence. That went better than expected. Eve stared at him. Better than expected? They shot up your penthouse. They didn't kill anyone, and Douglas thinks you're still his. Alexander moved to the window, checking for additional threats. Plus, I got to test our new partnership under fire. Very informative. Partnership. Eve picked up the briefcase, noting its weight. What's really in here? Bearer bonds, as advertised. About 2 million worth. Alexander's smile was sharp. Douglas needs them to buy weapons from his Russian contacts. Weapons he plans to use against my pack. And you're just giving them to him? I'm giving him counterfeit bonds that will pass initial inspection but fall apart under serious scrutiny. By the time he realizes they're fake, he'll already be committed to a war he can't win. Alexander's eyes met hers. Welcome to supernatural politics, Eve. It's complicated. Over the next 2 weeks, Eve learned exactly how complicated. Alexander's organization was nothing like Douglas's operation. Where Douglas ruled through fear and brutality, Alexander led through loyalty and respect. His people, werewolves, vampires, and humans alike, followed him because they believed in what they were building. The old ways are dying, Alexander explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions. Supernatural creatures hiding in shadows, preying on humans, fighting each other for scraps. It's unsustainable. They were in his private office, a smaller space than the destroyed penthouse living room but infinitely more personal. Books lined the walls, and comfortable chairs were arranged around a fireplace that actually worked. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where the Alpha could drop his armor and just be a man. So what's the alternative? Eve curled up in her favorite chair, a cup of coffee warming her hands. These sessions had become the highlight of her week, Alexander dropping his professional mask, sharing his vision for a world where supernatural creatures could live openly and safely. Integration. Cooperation. Using our abilities to protect instead of exploit. Alexander leaned back in his chair, and Eve noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. It's slow work, and not everyone agrees with the direction. Hence the weapons Douglas is trying to buy. Among other things. Alexander's jaw tightened. There are factions within the supernatural community that prefer the old ways. They see me as weak, compromised by human morality. Are you? The question slipped out before Eve could stop it. Alexander looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. What do you think? Eve considered the question seriously. In 2 weeks, she'd seen Alexander's operation from the inside. His people had strict rules about civilian casualties, about collateral damage, about the difference between justice and revenge. It was a far cry from Douglas's anything-goes approach. I think you're the strongest person I've ever met, she said honestly. It takes more strength to show mercy than to show violence. Alexander's smile was soft, grateful. Thank you. That means more than you know. The moment stretched between them, loaded with things neither was ready to say. Eve felt heat climb her neck, and she buried her face in her coffee cup to hide the flush. Tell me about your training with Marcus, Alexander said, changing the subject to safer ground. Eve grimaced. Marcus Rivera was Alexander's head of security, a former Navy SEAL who'd been turned vampire during a mission gone wrong. He was efficient, deadly, and had no patience for Eve's rusty skills. He says I'm out of practice, she admitted. Too much time mixing drinks, not enough time staying sharp. And what do you think? I think he's an ass, but he's not wrong. Eve set down her coffee. 20 years of killing, and 3 weeks behind a bar made me soft. It's embarrassing. You held your own against Douglas's team. Barely. And only because you were there to clean up my mistakes. Eve's frustration bled through her voice. I used to be the best, Alexander. Now I'm just another weapon that needs sharpening. Alexander leaned forward, his expression intense. You're not a weapon, Eve. You're a person with particular skills. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I went from Douglas's killer to your killer. Different boss, same job. No. Alexander's voice was firm. My people don't kill unless there's no other choice. We protect, we defend, we neutralize threats. But we don't murder for convenience or profit. Eve wanted to believe him. Desperately. But 20 years of conditioning was hard to break. What if I told you I'm not sure I can be what you need me to be? She asked quietly. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. Then I'd say we figure it out together. One day at a time. 3 days later, Eve got her first real test. The Feldon Company occupied a glass tower in the financial district, all steel and ambition reaching toward the sky. According to intelligence, they were developing some kind of new surveillance technology that could track supernatural creatures through their unique biological signatures. In and out, Marcus briefed her in the van. Security blueprints from the 15th floor server room. No violence unless absolutely necessary. Define necessary. Eve checked her gear one final time. Lockpicks, electronic jammers, a small pistol with subsonic rounds. Imminent threat to your life or mission compromise. Marcus's voice was flat. This is intelligence gathering, not an assassination. Eve nodded, but her hands were already shaking with adrenaline. It felt good to be back in the field, dangerous and alive in a way that mixing drinks never could. The infiltration went smoothly at first. Eve bypassed building security, made it to the 15th floor, and accessed the server room without triggering any alarms. The blueprints were exactly where intelligence said they'd be, and she was copying files when everything went wrong. Excuse me. The voice came from behind her, female and nervous. You're not supposed to be here. Eve turned slowly, keeping her hands visible. A young woman stood in the doorway, early 20s, probably a night shift secretary who'd come to check on something. She looked scared but determined, her hand hovering near what was probably a panic button. Building maintenance, Eve said smoothly, gesturing to her generic coveralls. Just updating some server protocols. At 2 in the morning? Without authorization? The woman stepped closer, and Eve could see her name tag, Sarah Chen. I'm calling security. Everything slowed down. Sarah reached for the panic button, and Eve's training took over. 20 years of conditioned responses overrode 3 weeks of moral reformation. Eve moved. The killing strike was swift and professional, pressure on the carotid artery, cutting off blood flow to the brain. Sarah collapsed without a sound, and Eve caught her body before it could hit the floor. For a moment, Eve just stood there, holding the dead weight of a girl who'd been doing her job. Sarah's eyes were open, staring at nothing, and she looked younger than Kira. No innocence harmed. Alexander's rule echoed in Eve's mind as she stared at Sarah's face. This wasn't self-defense, it was convenience killing, the kind Douglas would have applauded. The kind of person Eve was trying not to be anymore. But Sarah was dead, and there was no taking it back. Eve finished the mission on autopilot, downloading the files and erasing her digital footprints. She positioned Sarah's body to look like an accident, slipped and hit her head on the server rack. Not perfect, but it would buy time. The extraction was flawless. Marcus picked her up 3 blocks away, and they were back at headquarters within the hour. Eve handed over the stolen blueprints and filed her report, leaving out certain details. Clean job, Marcus said, reviewing her work. Any complications? None worth mentioning. The lie came easily, practiced. But that night, Eve lay awake staring at the ceiling, seeing Sarah's face every time she closed her eyes. She'd crossed a line she'd promised herself she wouldn't cross, and the worst part was how easy it had been. How natural. The news broke the next morning. Feld & Company's secretary dies in tragic accident. The story was buried on page 6, just another workplace fatality in a city full of them. But someone was paying attention. I want her found. The voice on the television was cold, authoritative, and made Eve's blood freeze in her veins. Someone infiltrated my building, stole proprietary information, and killed one of my employees. I want to know who, and I want to know why. Axel Felden stood behind a podium in the Feld & Company lobby, his silver hair perfectly styled and his expression carved from granite. He was older than in the photos Eve had studied, probably mid-50s, but his voice was exactly the same. Exactly the same as the man who'd given the order to kill her parents 20 years ago. We're offering a $1 million reward for information leading to the capture of this ghost assassin, Axel continued. Whoever did this thinks they can hide behind corporate espionage, but they're wrong. I will find them, and I will make them pay. Eve sat frozen in Alexander's office, watching her parents' killer promise to hunt her down. The irony was suffocating. She'd finally found the man she'd spent 20 years looking for, and now he was looking for her. Eve? Alexander's voice seemed to come from very far away. What is it? She told him everything. About her parents, about the night that had started her down the path to becoming an assassin, about the voice that had haunted her nightmares for 2 decades. And finally, about Sarah Chen. Alexander listened without judgment, his expression growing darker with each revelation. You're sure it's him? He asked when she finished. Positive. I've been hearing that voice in my head for 20 years. Eve's hands were shaking. He ordered their execution like he was ordering lunch. Clinical. Cold. And the secretary? Eve closed her eyes. I fucked up. She wasn't a threat, just scared. But my training kicked in, and... She opened her eyes, met his gaze. I broke your rule. No innocents harmed. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Eve braced herself for disappointment, for anger, for the termination of their partnership. Instead, he moved around the desk and pulled her into his arms. I'm sorry, he said quietly. About your parents, about last night, about all of it. Eve buried her face against his shoulder, breathing in his scent. I killed an innocent person. Doesn't that change things? It changes some things. Alexander's voice was careful. But not the important ones. You made a mistake under pressure, and you're clearly struggling with it. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. And who am I? Alexander pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. Someone worth saving. Someone worth protecting. Someone I... Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by the sound of Marcus's voice over the intercom. Boss, we've got a problem. 3 black SUVs just pulled up outside. Douglas is here, and he looks pissed. Douglas stormed into Alexander's office without knocking, his face thunderous. What the hell did you do? Good morning to you too, Alexander said mildly, but Eve could see the tension in his shoulders. Is there a problem? Feld & Company is offering a $1 million bounty for information about their break-in. Douglas threw a newspaper on the desk. Care to explain why Eleven's face is going to be plastered on every street corner by tomorrow? Eve felt ice form in her veins. My face? Security cameras, you stupid girl. Partial facial recognition from the lobby and elevator. Douglas's voice was acid. Axel Felden has connections all over this city. It's only a matter of time before someone identifies you. Alexander's expression went very still. How long do we have? Hours. Maybe less. Douglas's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. Your pet assassin just became a liability, Torino. What are you going to do about it? The question hung in the air like a knife. Eve looked between the two men, one who owned her past, one who might represent her future, and realized her carefully balanced double life was about to come crashing down. I'll handle it, Alexander said quietly. How? Douglas demanded. Alexander's smile was sharp and dangerous. Leave that to me. After Douglas left, promising dire consequences if the situation wasn't resolved, Alexander turned to Eve. Pack a bag. We're leaving the city. Running away? Eve shook her head. That's not going to solve anything. Axel won't stop looking for me. I'm not running away from anything. Alexander's voice was grim. I'm going hunting. Alexander. He killed your parents. He's threatening my people. And now he's put a price on your head. Alexander's eyes flashed amber. Axel Felden just made this personal. Eve stared at him, seeing the alpha wolf beneath the civilized exterior. What are you planning? I'm planning to give you what you've wanted for 20 years. Alexander's smile was all teeth. Justice. They left the city that afternoon, driving north in Alexander's armored SUV. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Use Axel's obsession with finding the ghost assassin against him. He'll come for you, Alexander explained as they drove through the mountains toward a safe house. Men like Felden can't resist the chance to personally confront their enemies. Especially when that enemy killed someone under his protection. And when he does? We'll be ready. Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. But Eve, you need to understand, once we do this, there's no going back. Axel Felden has connections to some very powerful people. Taking him down will make us enemies. Eve thought about Sarah Chen, about her parents, about 20 years of violence and blood. I'm already someone's enemy. At least this time, it'll be for the right reasons. Alexander glanced at her, something warm in his expression. When this is over, what do you want to do? I don't know. Eve watched the trees blur past the window. For 20 years, killing Axel was the only future I could imagine. I'm not sure what comes after. Whatever you want, Alexander said quietly. You'll have choices, real ones this time. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of unspoken feelings settling between them. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Alexander pulled off the highway toward a cabin nestled in the woods. Home sweet home, he said, but his voice was tense. That's when Eve saw them, muzzle flashes in the trees, men in tactical gear surrounding the cabin. An ambush. Alexander. She grabbed the wheel as bullets shattered the windshield. The SUV swerved off the road, tires screaming against gravel. Alexander fought for control as more gunfire erupted from the woods. They were sitting ducks, trapped in a vehicle that was bulletproof but not tank-proof. Out, Alexander shouted, kicking open his door. Move. Eve rolled out the passenger side as the SUV's engine block exploded in a shower of sparks and steam. Armed figures emerged from the tree line, at least a dozen, moving with military precision. There. One of them pointed at Eve. That's the target. Eve sprinted toward the cabin, zigzagging to avoid the hail of bullets chewing up the ground around her feet. Behind her, she could hear Alexander's roar of fury as he shifted into his wolf form. She almost made it to cover when the sniper's bullet took her in the shoulder, spinning her around and dropping her to the gravel. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and nauseating. Through the haze of agony, she saw the tactical team closing in. Saw Alexander, massive in his wolf form, tearing through them like they were paper dolls. But there were too many, and more were coming. One of the soldiers raised his rifle, the barrel pointed at Eve's head. She was too hurt to move, too dizzy to fight back. This was how it ended, bleeding out in the dirt, just like the first time. But then Alexander was there, human again but moving with inhuman speed. His hand closed around the soldier's throat, and there was a wet crack as neck bones snapped. Don't, Alexander snarled to the remaining attackers, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. Don't even think about it. Most of them backed away, but one soldier, braver or stupider than the rest, swung his rifle toward Alexander's back. Behind you. Eve gasped. Alexander spun, caught the rifle barrel, and used it to pull the soldier into a devastating uppercut. The man dropped like a stone, and suddenly the forest was quiet except for the moaning of the wounded. Eve. Alexander knelt beside her, his hands gentle despite the violence he'd just unleashed. How bad? Through and through, she managed, pressing her hand to the wound. I'll live. Yes, you will. Alexander's voice was fierce with determination. I promise. He helped her sit up, using his shirt to apply pressure to the bullet wound. The pain was incredible, but it was nothing compared to the warmth in his eyes as he looked at her. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For saving my life. For believing in me. For giving me a choice. Eve reached up with her good hand, touched his face. For seeing me as more than just a weapon. Alexander caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. Eve. I know this is crazy timing, she said, her words tumbling over each other. And I know we're probably going to die fighting Axel Felden. But I need you to know that what I feel for you. Alexander silenced her with a kiss. It was nothing like their frantic coupling in her apartment, nothing like the desperate passion born of secrets and lies. This was soft and sure and full of promise, a claiming that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with choice. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I love you, Alexander said against her lips. Whatever else happens, whatever comes next, I love you. Eve stared into his pale green eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not the blood-soaked path of revenge she'd been walking for 20 years, but something bright and clean and full of possibility. I love you too, she whispered back. Alexander smiled, and despite the gunfire, despite the blood, despite the army of enemies closing in around them, Eve felt something like hope bloom in her chest. They had each other. They had a chance. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Chapter 5. The mission to intercept Senator Morrison's arms shipment went flawlessly. No casualties, minimal property damage, and enough evidence to put 3 corrupt politicians behind bars for the next decade. Even Marcus grudgingly admitted it was textbook work. Clean entry, clean extraction, and you didn't kill anyone, Alexander said as they drove back to his penthouse. I'm impressed. Eve leaned back in the passenger seat, adrenaline still singing in her veins. Don't sound so surprised. I can follow orders when they make sense. Can you? Alexander's smile was warm, fond. Because I seem to remember someone telling me she didn't take orders from anyone. That was before. Eve turned to look at him, studying his profile in the streetlights. Before I understood what we were building together. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, something deep and primal that made her pulse quicken. And what are we building, Eve? The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Eve felt heat climb her neck as she considered her answer. Something worth protecting, she said quietly. Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yes. It is. Back at the penthouse, they celebrated with expensive whiskey and takeout Chinese food, sitting on the floor in front of the fireplace like normal people instead of supernatural creatures planning the overthrow of corrupt politicians. Eve had never felt so relaxed, so comfortable in her own skin. Tell me something, Alexander said, refilling her glass. What did you want to be when you were little? Before everything went wrong. Eve considered the question, digging through memories she'd buried long ago. A veterinarian. I wanted to help animals that couldn't help themselves. She laughed, but it came out bitter. Ironic, considering what I became. Not ironic. Consistent. Alexander's voice was gentle. You've always wanted to protect those who can't protect themselves. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? I killed Sarah Chen because it was convenient. You killed Sarah Chen because 20 years of conditioning overrode 3 weeks of rehabilitation. Alexander set down his glass, turned to face her fully. The fact that you're still struggling with it tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Eve stared into the fire, watching flames dance against blackened logs. Sometimes I wonder if you see someone who doesn't actually exist. Some idealized version of what I could be instead of what I am. What you are, Alexander said, moving closer, is extraordinary. Brave. Loyal. Beautiful. His hand found her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin. Worthy of love. The last words came out barely above a whisper, but they hit Eve like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had told her she was worthy of anything besides fear? Alexander. He kissed her, soft and sure and full of promises. Eve melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as 20 years of walls crumbled under the gentle assault of his mouth. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I want to mark you, Alexander said against her lips, his voice rough with want and something deeper. Make you mine in every way that matters. Eve pulled back to look at him, seeing the wolf burning bright in his pale green eyes. What does that mean? For someone like me? It means you'd be part of the pack. Protected by pack law, bound by pack loyalty. Alexander's hands framed her face. It means forever, Eve. No going back, no changing your mind when things get difficult. Forever. The word should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Do it, she whispered. Alexander's eyes flashed amber, and he kissed her again with bruising intensity. This time, when his mouth moved to her throat, his canines were sharp against her skin. The bite, when it came, was quick and clean. Pain flared bright and hot, followed immediately by pleasure so intense it made her vision blur. She could feel something fundamental shifting inside her, some invisible thread connecting her to Alexander in ways she didn't fully understand. Mine, Alexander growled against her throat, and Eve felt the word resonate in her bones. Yours, she agreed breathlessly. They made love on the rug in front of the fire, slow and thorough and full of wonder. Afterward, wrapped in Alexander's arms, Eve drifted off to sleep feeling safer than she had in 20 years. She woke to unfamiliar sensations. The mark on her throat throbbed with a low, pleasant heat that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. More disturbing was the awareness that tickled at the edges of her consciousness, Alexander's presence, even though he was in the shower. She could feel his emotions like whispers in the back of her mind, contentment, protectiveness, and an overwhelming sense of rightness. It's normal, Alexander said when she asked him about it over breakfast. The mate bond creates a connection between us. You'll be able to sense my general emotional state, and I yours. It fades with distance, but never disappears entirely. Eve touched the mark self-consciously. It was invisible to human eyes, Alexander had explained, but any supernatural creature would recognize it immediately. How long does it last? Alexander's smile was soft. Forever. Or until one of us dies. The words should have been romantic. Instead, they sent a chill down Eve's spine. Forever was a long time for someone in her line of work. Hey. Alexander caught her chin, tilted her face up to meet his eyes. Where did you go just now? Nowhere good. Eve forced a smile. Just thinking about Douglas. He's going to want a report on last night's mission. Alexander's expression darkened. How much does he know about our arrangement? Enough to be useful, not enough to be dangerous. Eve hoped that was still true. As far as he knows, I'm feeding you information while gathering intelligence on your operations. And how long do you think that story will hold up? Eve considered the question seriously. Douglas wasn't stupid, and he'd been suspicious of her increased confidence lately. Plus, there was the matter of the mate mark. I should go, she said, standing up from the table. The longer I stay away, the more questions he'll ask. Alexander caught her hand as she passed his chair. Be careful, Eve. Douglas is dangerous when he feels threatened. I know. She squeezed his fingers. I can handle him. But as Eve left the penthouse and made her way across town to Douglas's compound, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. The Crane organization's headquarters occupied an entire city block, hidden behind the facade of a legitimate shipping company. Eve had spent countless hours in these halls, receiving assignments and reporting kills. Coming back felt like stepping into a nightmare. 11. Douglas looked up from his desk as she entered his office. Punctual as always. I trust your evening with Mr. Torino was productive? Moderately. He's planning to move against the Petrosky vampires next week. Thinks they're getting too bold in their feeding habits. The lie came easily, practiced. Douglas nodded, making notes on his tablet. And their defensive capabilities? Standard stuff. Electronic surveillance, human security, a few vampire enforcers. Eve kept her voice bored, professional. Nothing we couldn't handle if the price was right. Interesting. Douglas set down his tablet, leaned back in his chair. Tell me, 11, are you familiar with the concept of mate marks? Eve's blood turned to ice, but she kept her expression neutral. Supernatural bonding rituals. Why? Because you're wearing one. Douglas's smile was sharp as a blade. Quite fresh, too. Probably less than 12 hours old. Shit. Eve had known the mark would be visible to other supernatural creatures, but she'd hoped Douglas's human limitations would buy her time. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Douglas stood up, moved around the desk with predatory grace. See, the thing about mate marks is they're quite distinctive. Each pack has its own signature, you might say. And the mark you're wearing? It belongs to Alexander Torino. Eve said nothing, but her hand drifted unconsciously to her throat. So the question becomes, Douglas continued, what exactly has my best assassin been doing with my biggest rival? And don't insult my intelligence by claiming it's purely professional. Eve met his eyes steadily. My personal life is none of your business. Your personal life became my business the moment you accepted a job working for me. Douglas's voice turned cold. Who marked you, 11? No one. Douglas backhanded her across the face, the blow hard enough to split her lip. Who? Marked. You. Eve wiped blood from her mouth, tasted copper and rage. Go to hell. Douglas smiled, and it was exactly as cold as she remembered from childhood. Have it your way. Marcus. Two men entered the office, not the Marcus from Alexander's organization, but Douglas's head of security. A bulky man with dead eyes and scarred knuckles. Follow her, Douglas ordered. 24-hour surveillance. I want to know everyone she talks to, everywhere she goes, everything she does. And Marcus? Be discreet. We don't want to spook our little bird before we learn where she nests. Eve left the compound with Marcus's eyes burning into her back, knowing she'd just signed Alexander's death warrant along with her own. For 3 days, she played the game. Went to work at Eclipse, filed routine reports with Douglas, tried to act like everything was normal. But she could feel Marcus's people watching her, documenting her movements, building a case against her. On the 4th day, they moved. Eve was walking to her apartment after her shift when the van pulled up beside her. No warning, no theatrics, just professionals doing a job. A tranquilizer dart in her neck, strong hands dragging her into darkness, and then nothing. She woke up in hell. Douglas's underground compound was exactly what she'd expected. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of soundproofing that meant screaming was pointless. Eve found herself chained to a metal chair in the center of a windowless room, her head pounding from whatever they'd used to knock her out. Good, you're awake. Douglas entered the room like he was visiting a sick friend. I was hoping we could have a conversation. About what? Eve's voice came out hoarse. About Alexander Torino's plans. His weaknesses. His fears. Douglas pulled up a chair, sat down across from her like they were having coffee. You've been living in his pocket for weeks now. Surely you learned something useful. I learned he's 10 times the man you'll ever be. Douglas sighed, almost sadly. I'd hoped you'd be more cooperative. Ah well. He nodded to someone behind Eve, and electricity shot through her body. The pain was incredible, white-hot agony that made her muscles spasm and her vision blur. When it stopped, she was gasping like a landed fish. That was setting 3, Douglas said conversationally. It goes up to 10. Shall we try again? For the next 6 hours, Douglas asked questions and Eve refused to answer them. The torture was methodical, professional, nothing that would cause permanent damage, but everything that would cause maximum pain. By the end, Eve was barely conscious, held upright only by the chains around her wrists. You know, Douglas said, checking his watch, Mr. Torino is currently tearing the city apart looking for you. Very dramatic, really. He's already hit 3 of my safe houses and killed a dozen of my people. All very passionate and emotional. Eve tried to speak, managed only a croak. The thing is, Douglas continued, he's never going to find you here. This place doesn't exist on any city plans, any tax records, any utility maps. You could scream for 100 years and no one would hear you. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. So why don't you save us both some time and tell me what I want to know? Eve looked up at him through swollen eyes and managed to smile. Because Alexander is going to kill you. And I want to be alive to watch. Douglas's expression went flat, cold. We'll see about that. Alexander found her 18 hours later. The assault on Douglas's compound was swift, brutal, and absolutely devastating. Eve heard the explosions first, felt the building shake as Alexander's people breached the outer defenses. Then came the gunfire, the screams, the wet sounds of supernatural creatures doing what they did best. When her cell door finally exploded inward, Alexander stood in the smoking doorway like an avenging angel. His clothes were torn and bloody, his eyes burning with wolf-light, and his expression was absolutely murderous. Eve. Her name came out like a prayer. He was across the room in an instant, breaking her chains with supernatural strength. Eve collapsed into his arms, her legs too weak to support her weight. I've got you, he whispered against her hair. I've got you. You're safe now. Douglas. Dead. Alexander's voice was flat, final. Along with most of his organization. The survivors are running for their lives. Eve should have felt satisfaction, vindication, something. Instead, she just felt empty. 20 years of hatred, ended in a single night of violence. It felt anticlimactic. Can you walk? Alexander asked gently. Eve tried to stand, nearly collapsed again. Not really. Alexander lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest as he carried her out of the compound. The hallways were full of bodies and blood, testament to the fury of an alpha protecting his mate. The hospital, Eve mumbled against his shoulder. Already called. They're waiting for us. As they emerged into daylight, Eve caught a glimpse of the destruction Alexander had wrought. The compound was ruins, smoking wreckage that would burn for hours. Douglas's empire, built over decades, reduced to ash in a single night. How many? She asked. Too many. Alexander's jaw was tight. But they took you. They hurt you. There are some lines you don't cross. The hospital was clean and bright and full of people who asked too many questions. Eve submitted to the examinations, the x-rays, the concerned looks from doctors who'd clearly seen torture victims before. Minor injuries, they said. Nothing that wouldn't heal given time. But as she lay in the narrow hospital bed, watching Alexander pace like a caged wolf, Eve realized the real damage wasn't physical. Sit down, she said quietly. You're making me nervous. Alexander stopped pacing, looked at her with eyes still wild from the hunt. I should have protected you. Should have seen Douglas's trap coming. You couldn't have known. Eve patted the bed beside her. Come here. Alexander perched on the edge of the mattress, his hands gentle as he checked her bandages. When I couldn't find you, when I felt your pain through the bond. His voice broke slightly. I've never been that terrified in my life. But you did find me. Eve caught his hand, squeezed his fingers. You saved me. Barely. Alexander's expression was haunted. A few more hours, Anne. But you didn't. A few more hours didn't happen. Eve shifted over, made room for him on the narrow bed. Lie with me. Alexander stretched out beside her, careful not to jostle her injuries. Eve curled into his warmth, breathing in his scent. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. About my parents. About how I became what I was. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Eve took a shaky breath. Because you saved my life tonight, and you deserve to know what you saved. So she told him everything. About her parents' murder when she was 8 years old, about watching from the closet as men in expensive suits executed them like animals. About Douglas finding her afterward, broken and alone, and molding her into his weapon. I was never supposed to have a choice, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Douglas made sure of that. Every decision, every path, every option led back to him. Alexander's arms tightened around her. Not anymore. No. Eve looked up at him, seeing her future reflected in his pale green eyes. Not anymore. The moon goddess knew, Alexander said suddenly. When she gave you a second chance, she knew you'd find your way to me. Maybe. Eve smiled, feeling something like peace settle in her chest. Or maybe she just knew I was too stubborn to stay dead. Alexander laughed, the sound bright and warm in the sterile hospital room. That too. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day, a fresh start, a chance to build something clean from the ashes of what came before. Eve closed her eyes and let herself believe in forever. Chapter 6. 2 weeks after Douglas's compound burned to the ground, Eve still woke up screaming. The nightmares were always the same: concrete walls, fluorescent lights, and the smell of her own fear. Sometimes it was Douglas holding the electrical device, sometimes it was faceless strangers, and sometimes it was her 8-year-old self watching her parents die all over again. It's just dreams, she told Alexander when he found her sitting on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, shaking and covered in cold sweat. I'm fine. Alexander knelt beside her, his presence warm and solid in the darkness. You don't have to be fine. Not yet. When? The word came out broken. When do I get to stop seeing his face every time I close my eyes? I don't know. Alexander's honesty was both brutal and comforting. But you don't have to face it alone. Eve leaned into his warmth, breathing in his scent until her heartbeat slowed to something approaching normal. The mate bond hummed between them, Alexander's calm strength flowing through the connection like medicine. I want to find him, she said quietly. Axel Felden. I want to know why he killed them. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'll never be ready. But I need to know. Eve looked up at him, seeing understanding in his pale green eyes. Will you help me? Always. Alexander's resources were impressive. Within 48 hours, they had files on Axel Felden dating back 30 years, corporate records, financial statements, property holdings, even childhood medical records. What they found painted a picture of a man obsessed with control and precision. Born Axel Petrov in Moscow, Marcus read from his tablet as they gathered in Alexander's office. Immigrated to the US at age 12 with his mother after his father's death. Changed his name to Felden when he was 18. Supernatural? Eve asked, though she already suspected the answer. Wolf, Alexander confirmed grimly. Alpha bloodline, but his pack was destroyed in territorial disputes when he was young. He's been operating as a lone wolf ever since. That's unusual, Marcus noted. Most lone wolves either join new packs or go feral within a few years. This guy's been functioning independently for over 3 decades. Eve studied Axel's photograph, the same silver-haired man she'd seen on television, the face that had haunted her nightmares for 20 years. What about connections to my parents? Any record of them knowing each other? Nothing direct, Alexander said, pulling up another file. But your father worked for a consulting firm that had contracts with several of Felden's early business ventures. It's possible their paths crossed professionally. My father was an accountant. Eve's voice was flat. What could he possibly have done to deserve execution? Maybe he saw something he shouldn't have. Maybe he asked the wrong questions. Alexander's jaw tightened. Or maybe Axel just wanted him out of the way for reasons we haven't discovered yet. Eve stared at the file spread across the conference table, 20 years of searching condensed into neat folders and digital records. She should have felt satisfied, vindicated. Instead, she just felt hollow. I want to talk to him, she said suddenly. Eve. Not to kill him. Not yet. Eve looked up at Alexander. I want to hear him explain why my parents had to die. I want to look him in the eye and understand what kind of monster orders the execution of innocent people. Alexander's expression was troubled. That's not a good idea. Axel is dangerous, and he's been looking for you since the Felden Company break-in. Walking into his territory is suicide. Then we make sure I don't walk in alone. Eve's voice was steady, determined. Your people, your plan, your backup. But I need this, Alexander. I need to know. The plan was simple in theory, complex in execution. Eve would approach Axel under the pretense of turning herself in, the ghost assassin, who'd infiltrated his company, surrendering in exchange for immunity. Alexander's team would maintain surveillance from multiple positions, ready to extract her at the first sign of trouble. Wear this, Alexander said, fastening a small device to her collar. GPS tracker and panic button. If anything goes wrong, press it and we'll come for you. Nothing's going to go wrong. Eve checked her reflection in the mirror, noting how the conservative business suit made her look younger, more vulnerable. Perfect for the role she was about to play. Eve. Alexander caught her arm as she headed for the door. If you change your mind, if you decide you don't need this. I know. She stood on her toes, kissed him softly. But I do need it. I've been running from the truth for 20 years. It's time to face it. Alexander's eyes flashed amber with worry, but he nodded. Be careful. Always am. The lie came easily, but they both knew it wasn't true. Felden Company's headquarters looked exactly the same as it had the night Eve broke in, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a monument to corporate ambition. She walked through the lobby with confident strides, ignoring the security cameras she knew were tracking her every movement. I'm here to see Mr. Felden, she told the receptionist, a young woman with nervous eyes and perfectly manicured nails. Tell him the ghost assassin would like to discuss terms. 20 minutes later, Eve found herself in a corner office that screamed money and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Behind an enormous mahogany desk sat the man who'd destroyed her childhood. Ms. Chen, Axel Felden said, not bothering to stand. Or do you prefer 11? I confess I'm not certain which name you consider your real identity. Eve works fine. She settled into the chair across from his desk, noting the two bodyguards positioned near the windows. Nice office. Very intimidating. Thank you. I find intimidation quite useful in business. Axel leaned back in his chair, studying her with pale blue eyes. You're younger than I expected. Prettier, too. Douglas certainly knew how to pick his weapons. The casual reference to Douglas made Eve's skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm here to make a deal. Are you? How interesting. Axel's smile was sharp as broken glass. And what exactly are you offering? Information about Douglas's network. Names, locations, operational details. Eve leaned forward slightly. Everything you'd need to consolidate his territory now that he's dead. Douglas isn't dead. The words hit Eve like a physical blow. What? Oh, he's certainly wounded. Lost most of his organization, several key lieutenants, his headquarters. Axel's voice was conversational, like he was discussing the weather. But the man himself survived your boyfriend's little tantrum. He's actually here in the building, if you'd like to say hello. Eve's hand moved instinctively toward the panic button, but Axel's voice stopped her. I wouldn't, if I were you. You see, I know all about your little insurance policy. The tracking device, the backup team, the romantic rescue plan. His smile widened. Mr. Torino is so predictably noble, isn't he? Ice formed in Eve's veins. How do you know about your plans? Simple. Douglas has been most cooperative in sharing intelligence about his former weapon, including details about your new relationship. Axel stood up, moved around the desk with predatory grace. Did you really think you could infiltrate my building and steal my property without consequences? Sarah Chen was an accident. The words slipped out before Eve could stop them. Sarah Chen was my niece. Axel's voice went flat, cold. My sister's only child. A bright, innocent girl who was working late to help support her family while she put herself through medical school. The revelation hit Eve like a freight train. Sarah hadn't been a random casualty, she'd been family. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. Assassins rarely concern themselves with the personal lives of their victims. Axel was closer now, close enough that Eve could smell his cologne. But I concern myself with the personal lives of my enemies. Which brings us to why you're really here. I told you. You told me what you thought I wanted to hear. But we both know the truth, don't we, Eve? Axel's hand touched her shoulder, and Eve felt something impossible, something that made her blood turn to ice. You're here because you feel it too. The mate bond. Faint but unmistakable, humming between them like a discordant note in a symphony. Eve jerked away from his touch, her mind reeling. No. That's impossible. Is it? Axel's smile was triumphant. Werewolves can have multiple potential mates, Eve. It's rare, but it happens. And you, my dear, are mine as much as you are his. Eve's hand found the panic button, pressed it hard. Nothing happened. No alarm, no rescue team, no Alexander bursting through the doors to save her. Signal jammers, Axel explained pleasantly. Very effective against electronic devices. Your knight in shining armor won't be coming to rescue you this time. Panic clawed at Eve's throat, but she forced herself to stay calm. 20 years of training didn't disappear in moments of crisis. What do you want? What I've always wanted. What I killed your parents to achieve. Axel circled her chair like a shark scenting blood. I want you, Eve. Free of all obligations, all distractions, all competing loyalties. I want you to be mine. The world tilted sideways. You killed them, for me? I killed them to free you. Axel's voice carried the fervor of a true believer. Your parents were weak, small-minded people who would have held you back. They would have filled your head with outdated morality, useless sentiment. I gave you the chance to become something magnificent. You gave me to Douglas. Eve's voice was barely a whisper. Douglas was a convenient tool. A way to hone your skills, to strip away your human weaknesses. Axel knelt beside her chair, his hand reaching for her throat. But that phase of your development is over. Now you can fulfill your true potential. Eve saw his intention a split second before he moved. The marking bite, meant to override Alexander's claim and bind her to him permanently. She twisted away, her chair toppling as she rolled across the expensive carpet. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Axel said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. You can't fight what you are, Eve. You can't fight me. The office door exploded inward, and Alexander appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel. His eyes were pure amber, his wolf barely contained beneath human skin. Get away from her. The words came out as a growl. Axel smiled, not moving from his position between Alexander and Eve. Mr. Torino. Right on schedule. The signal jamming, Eve gasped, struggling to her feet. It was a trap. Of course it was. Axel's attention never left Alexander. Did you really think I'd let you waltz into my territory without preparing for every contingency? Alexander's response was to shift into his wolf form and launch himself across the office. What followed was brutal, primal, and absolutely devastating. Two alpha wolves fighting for dominance in a space meant for civilized business meetings. Furniture disintegrated under the assault, windows cracked from the impact of supernatural bodies, and the air filled with the sounds of snarling and violence. Eve pressed herself against the wall, watching in horror as the two most important men in her life tried to kill each other. She should run, should escape while they were distracted, but her feet seemed rooted to the carpet. The fight might have continued indefinitely, but Douglas's appearance changed everything. Enough. The older man stood in the destroyed doorway, flanked by armed guards. This isn't what we agreed to, Felden. Axel, bloodied but still standing in human form, turned to face his supposed ally. The agreement has changed. Like hell it has. Douglas's voice was cold with fury. You promised me territorial control in exchange for information about the girl. Not some supernatural pissing contest. And you'll have your territory. After I claim what's mine. Axel's gaze flicked to Eve, then back to Douglas. Unless you have a problem with new management? Douglas's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I'm talking about consolidation. Efficiency. The elimination of redundant leadership. Axel moved faster than human eyes could follow, his hand closing around Douglas's throat. Your services are no longer required. The snap of breaking bone echoed through the destroyed office. Douglas's body hit the floor like a discarded puppet, his dead eyes staring at nothing. And that, Axel said pleasantly, straightening his tie, is how you handle a hostile takeover. Alexander, still in wolf form but wounded and breathing hard, positioned himself between Axel and Eve. His growl was a promise of violence. Now, Axel said, pulling a small device from his pocket. No need for further unpleasantness. The device emitted a high-pitched whine that made Alexander stagger. Some kind of sonic weapon, Eve realized, designed to incapacitate supernatural hearing. Wolfsbane derivative, Axel explained as Alexander collapsed. Quite effective against your kind. Don't worry, it's not fatal. I need him alive for what comes next. Eve knelt beside Alexander's fallen form, her hands gentle on his fur. What do you want? What I've always wanted. Axel gestured, and his guards moved forward. You. Willing or otherwise. I'll never be willing. Oh, my dear Eve. Axel's smile was cold as winter. After 20 years of shaping you into the perfect weapon, I think you underestimate just how persuasive I can be. The guards reached for her, and Eve realized with crystal clarity that Alexander's rescue plan had become another trap. Axel hadn't just killed her parents and stolen her childhood, he'd orchestrated every moment of her life since then. Even her rebellion had been part of his design. As darkness closed in around her, Eve's last conscious thought was of Alexander's amber eyes and the promise she might never be able to keep. She'd found her parents' killer. Now she just had to survive him. Chapter 7. Eve woke to the smell of jasmine and death. The jasmine came from candles burning in ornate holders around what looked like a bedroom designed by someone with unlimited money and deeply disturbed tastes. Silk sheets, mahogany furniture, and fresh flowers arranged like this was some kind of romantic sanctuary instead of a prison cell. The death smell came from whatever was rotting in the ventilation system. You're awake. Axel's voice came from the shadows near the window, cultured and calm. Excellent. I was beginning to worry the sedative dosage was too high. Eve tested her bonds, silver chains around her wrists and ankles, attached to a bed that was probably worth more than most people's cars. The metal burned against her skin, preventing any supernatural healing she might have inherited from Alexander's mark. Cozy. Her voice came out hoarse. Is this where you bring all your kidnapping victims? Only the special ones. Axel stepped into the light, and Eve's breath caught. He looked different, younger, stronger, with an energy that practically vibrated in the air around him. Do you like it? I had it designed specifically for you. Every detail chosen to appeal to your particular aesthetic. My aesthetic runs more toward not being chained to a bed by psychopaths. Axel laughed, the sound genuinely amused. Still defiant. I do so admire that about you, Eve. Most people would be begging by now. I'm not most people. No. You're not. Axel moved closer, and Eve could see something inhuman flickering behind his pale blue eyes. You're extraordinary. A perfect weapon wrapped in beautiful flesh. Do you know how long I've waited for this moment? 20 years, give or take. Eve kept her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. You've been planning this since you murdered my parents. Planning, preparing, perfecting. Axel sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something else, something that made her skin crawl. Did you know your parents weren't the first? I've been tracking potential mates for decades, eliminating the weak ones, nurturing the strong. The casual admission hit Eve like a physical blow. How many? Does it matter? They were all stepping stones to you. Axel's hand moved toward her face, and Eve jerked away from his touch. You're the culmination of everything I've worked toward. The perfect combination of skill, beauty, and supernatural potential. I'm already mated. Eve's voice was flat. Alexander marked me. That bond can't be broken. Can't it? Axel's smile was triumphant. You'd be surprised what a little witch magic can accomplish. He gestured toward the corner, and Eve saw her for the first time, an old woman sitting in a chair so still she might have been a statue. Her eyes were milky white with cataracts, but power radiated from her like heat from a forge. Meet Grandmother Vasquez, Axel said. She's been very helpful in enhancing my natural abilities. Among other things. The witch spoke for the first time, her voice like grinding stone. The moon goddess's mark can be severed. For a price. What price? Eve asked, though she dreaded the answer. Pain, the witch said simply. Yours and his. The bond must be burned away, thread by thread, until nothing remains but ash. Eve felt sick. You're going to torture Alexander. I'm going to do whatever it takes to claim what's mine. Axel stood up, began pacing around the bed like a caged predator. Your Mr. Torino is proving remarkably resilient. 3 of his businesses bombed, half his pack dead or missing, and he's still searching for you. Admirable, really. The words hit Eve like physical blows. Alexander's people were dying because of her, because she'd been stupid enough to walk into Axel's trap. Let them go, she said quietly. I'll do whatever you want, but let his pack live. Oh, my dear girl. You're in no position to negotiate. Axel's hand trailed along the silver chain binding her wrist. But I appreciate the sentiment. It shows how thoroughly corrupted you've become by human emotion. Caring about people isn't corruption. Isn't it? 20 years ago, you would have cut Alexander's throat without hesitation if I'd ordered it. Now look at you, willing to sacrifice yourself for his pack, his happiness, his life. Axel's voice carried disgust. He's made you weak. He's made me human. Human. Axel spat the word like a curse. Humans are prey, Eve. Food. They exist to serve their betters. The sooner you remember that, the easier this will be. Days blurred together in a haze of psychological torture. Axel didn't use electricity or knives, his methods were far more sophisticated. He brought her reports of Alexander's businesses burning, his pack members disappearing, his desperate search growing more destructive by the hour. He showed her photographs of the carnage, video footage of Alexander's grief-stricken face as he identified bodies. He's destroying himself looking for you, Axel said on what might have been the 4th day. Every death is on your head, Eve. Every family torn apart, every life lost, all because you chose to love him instead of accepting your true nature. Eve said nothing, but each piece of evidence felt like a knife between her ribs. Alexander was suffering because of her choices, and she was powerless to help him. The worst part was the bond. Not Alexander's mark, which still hummed faintly in the background of her consciousness, but the twisted connection to Axel that grew stronger every day. She could feel his emotions bleeding through, obsession, possessiveness, a hungry need that made her skin crawl. "It's working," the witch observed during one of her visits to check the magical bindings. "The false bond strengthens while the true one weakens. Soon, the alpha's mark will fade entirely." "How soon?" Axel asked. "Days. Perhaps a week." The witch's milky eyes fixed on Eve. "The girl fights harder than most. Her will is considerable. Her will is what makes her valuable." Axel's hand brushed Eve's hair, and she fought not to flinch. "But it will bend to mine in the end. They always do." Eve closed her eyes and tried to reach for Alexander through their fading connection. Sometimes, if she concentrated hard enough, she could feel him, his rage, his desperation, his absolute refusal to stop searching. It was the only thing keeping her sane. On the 7th day, everything changed. Eve was being moved to what Axel called the workshop, apparently some kind of laboratory where the witch performed her more intensive magical procedures, when she heard them. Voices. Female voices, speaking in hushed, terrified tones. "Been here 3 months. The injections are getting stronger. Tried to escape twice, but the guards." Eve's blood turned to ice. "Other prisoners. Other women. Who are they?" she asked the guard escorting her. The man, one of Douglas's former enforcers who'd apparently switched sides, just grunted. "Test subjects. Boss likes to experiment." "Experiment with what?" "Supernatural enhancement drugs. Trying to create artificial mates, super soldiers, that kind of thing." The guard's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "Most of them don't survive the process." The workshop was a sterile nightmare of medical equipment and mystical paraphernalia. Eve counted at least a dozen women strapped to gurneys, various tubes and wires connected to their unconscious forms. They ranged in age from late teens to middle-aged, but they all had the same pallor, the same wasted appearance of people being slowly drained of life. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Axel appeared beside her, his voice filled with pride. "My own private laboratory for perfecting the supernatural condition. Each woman represents a different approach to enhancement. You're experimenting on innocent people." Eve's voice was barely controlled fury. "I'm advancing the cause of supernatural evolution. These women are helping to create a better world." Axel gestured to the nearest gurney, where a young blonde woman lay motionless. Subject 12, for example, has shown remarkable adaptation to lycanthrope DNA injection. She's developing enhanced senses and physical strength. At what cost? Her sanity, mostly. And her lifespan. The process tends to burn through human physiology rather quickly. Axel shrugged like this was a minor inconvenience. "But the data we're gathering is invaluable." Eve stared at the unconscious women and felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every woman Axel had kidnapped, every life he destroyed in pursuit of his twisted vision. "The witch will begin the bonding ceremony tonight," Axel continued, oblivious to Eve's growing rage. "By tomorrow morning, you'll be mine completely. We can begin planning our empire." That night, as Axel celebrated with expensive wine and detailed descriptions of their future together, Eve made her choice. She was going to burn this place to the ground. The plan was simple because it had to be. Eve had no weapons, no allies, and no time. But she had something Axel didn't expect, 20 years of experience in impossible situations. She started with the woman in the cell next to hers. "My name is Eve," she whispered through the thin wall during what passed for night in the underground compound. "I'm going to get us out of here." "That's impossible," came the tired response. "The guards, the locks, Nothing's impossible. But I need your help." Eve kept her voice low, urgent. How many of us are there? How many can still fight? What followed was hours of careful communication, passing information cell to cell until Eve had a rough count. 16 women total, 8 of them still coherent enough to be useful in a fight. Not great odds, but Eve had worked with worse. The key was timing. And luck. And the assumption that Axel's arrogance would be his downfall. She was right on all counts. The uprising began during the next morning's feeding. Instead of accepting their drugged food, the women who could fight threw their bowls at the guards and rushed the doors. It was chaos, desperate and bloody, but it was also exactly the distraction Eve needed. Silver chains were strong, but the anchor points in the walls were only as solid as the concrete holding them. Eve had been testing the mounting brackets for days, working them loose grain by grain. When the first screams echoed through the compound, she put 20 years of training into one final pull. The chain tore free from the wall in a shower of concrete dust. Eve burst from her cell like an avenging angel, the loose chain in her hand serving as a 20-foot whip. The first guard went down hard, his skull cracked by silver links moving at supernatural speed. The second guard had time to reach for his weapon before Eve's chain wrapped around his throat. "Where are the keys?" she snarled. He pointed to a ring hanging from his belt, his face already turning purple. Eve took the keys and left him unconscious but alive. She had bigger targets. The compound erupted into chaos as 16 desperate women fought for their freedom. Most of the guards were human, trained to handle supernatural prisoners through technology and drugs rather than physical force. They weren't prepared for a coordinated uprising led by someone with Eve's skills. Eve fought her way through corridors she'd only seen while being transported, following the sound of gunfire and screaming toward what she hoped was the main laboratory. Behind her, she could hear the other women following, their voices raised in fury rather than fear for the first time in months. She found Axel in his workshop, frantically trying to destroy equipment and data while his world collapsed around him. The witch sat in the corner, her hands weaving patterns in the air that made Eve's vision blur. "You," Axel snarled when he saw her. "This is impossible." The chains were silver, the locks were made by humans for human prisoners. Eve advanced into the room, her makeshift weapon ready. "But I'm not human anymore, am I? You made sure of that 20 years ago." Axel's eyes flashed, and Eve saw the magic enhancement the witch had given him. His muscles bulged, his movements became fluid and deadly, and his fingernails extended into claws. "If you won't come willingly," he said, his voice distorted by supernatural rage, "I'll take you broken." The fight was brutal and desperate. Axel was stronger, faster, enhanced by magic beyond normal werewolf abilities. But Eve was fighting for more than her own life. She was fighting for every woman in this compound, every victim of Axel's obsession, every person who'd suffered because of his twisted vision. They destroyed the laboratory around them, equipment exploding in showers of sparks and chemical smoke. Eve's chain met Axel's claws again and again, silver against supernatural enhancement, skill against raw power. She was losing. Even with her training, even with her fury, Axel was simply too strong. He caught the chain on his forearm, yanked it from her grasp, and backhanded her across the room. Eve hit a bank of computers hard enough to crack the screens. "Enough," Axel growled, advancing on her prone form. "Submit, and I'll make this quick." That's when the wall exploded. Alexander burst through concrete and steel like they were paper, his wolf form massive and terrible in the flickering light. Behind him came Marcus and what looked like half the supernatural community in the city, werewolves, vampires, and humans united in their fury. The final battle was swift and absolute. Alexander's people tore through Axel's remaining guards like they were made of straw. The witch tried to cast something that would have leveled the building, but Marcus put 3 silver bullets in her chest before she could complete the spell. Alexander shifted back to human form as he reached Eve, his hands gentle despite the violence surrounding them. "I've got you," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "I've got you. You're safe now." But Axel wasn't finished. Enhanced by magic and driven by decades of obsession, he launched himself at Alexander's back with claws extended and murder in his eyes. Eve saw him coming. Saw the angle of his attack, the trajectory that would put his claws through Alexander's heart. Saw her future, her love, her chance at happiness about to be destroyed by the monster who'd already taken so much from her. She reached for something she'd felt only once before, the night she died in an alley and was given a second chance. The moon goddess's power, dormant but not gone, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. Silver light exploded from Eve's outstretched hand, not the harsh glare of artificial illumination but something ancient and divine. It caught Axel mid-leap, held him suspended in the air for a heartbeat that lasted forever. "This is for my parents," Eve said quietly. "For Sarah Chen. For every woman you tortured in pursuit of your sick obsession." The light intensified, and Axel screamed. Not with pain, but with the sound of something fundamentally unnatural being unmade. When the radiance faded, nothing remained but ash drifting to the laboratory floor. Afterward, as the compound burned and emergency vehicles screamed toward the scene, Eve sat in the back of an ambulance and watched her past finally turn to smoke. 16 women, Alexander reported, settling beside her on the narrow bench. All alive, all free. Medical says most of them will recover completely given time and treatment. And Axel's network? Gone. His corporate empire, his criminal organization, his supernatural experiments, all of it ended tonight. Alexander's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "It's over, Eve. Really over this time." Eve leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his scent and feeling the mate bond humming strong and true between them. The false connection to Axel was gone, burned away by divine fire, leaving only what was real and chosen and right. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home. We rebuild what was damaged, we help the survivors heal, and we figure out what comes next." Alexander's arms tightened around her. "Together." Together, Eve agreed, and for the first time in 20 years, the word felt like a promise instead of a threat. In the distance, the compound collapsed in on itself, taking the last remnants of Axel Felden's evil with it. But here in Alexander's arms, surrounded by people who'd risked everything to save her, Eve finally understood what the moon goddess had tried to tell her that night in the alley. Sometimes the only way forward was through the fire. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you didn't have to walk through it alone. Chapter 8. 6 months after Axel Felden's compound burned to ash, Eve woke up to sunlight streaming through windows that belonged to her. Their penthouse was nothing like Alexander's old place, all steel and intimidation. This was warm, lived in, with books scattered on coffee tables and photos of their life together covering every surface. It felt like home in a way Eve had never experienced before. "Good morning, beautiful." Alexander's voice was warm with sleep and contentment as he pulled her closer. "Sleep well?" "Like the dead." The phrase slipped out automatically, and they both winced. "Sorry. Poor choice of words." "Hey." Alexander's fingers found her chin, tilted her face toward his. "You're allowed to reference your past without apologizing. It's part of what makes you who you are." Eve smiled, still amazed by how easily he accepted all of her, the assassin, the survivor, the woman trying to build something new. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Only every day for the past 6 months." Alexander's kiss was soft, familiar. "But I don't mind hearing it again." They'd been planning their wedding for 2 months now, nothing elaborate, just a small ceremony with the pack and a few close friends. Eve had never imagined herself as a bride, but the idea of standing before their community and choosing Alexander publicly felt right. "Marcus called last night," Alexander said as they made coffee. "The new security contracts are coming along well. Looks like going completely legitimate was the right choice." "Any regrets?" Eve asked, though she knew the answer. They'd both walked away from the darker aspects of their lives, focusing on building something clean and sustainable. "None." Alexander's smile was certain. "What about you? Miss the excitement?" Eve considered the question seriously. Did she miss the adrenaline rush of a successful mission? The clarity that came with life or death decisions? Sometimes. But not enough to give up lazy mornings and the promise of forever. "Not even a little," she said, and meant it. That's when the doorbell rang. Victoria Torino stood in their hallway like a ghost from Alexander's past. Tall, elegant, with the kind of classical beauty that belonged in museum paintings. Her dark hair was shorter than in the photos Eve had seen, but her green eyes were exactly as striking as Alexander had described. "Hello, Alexander." Victoria's voice was soft, cultured, with just the right note of uncertainty. "I hope I'm not intruding." Alexander had gone completely still, his coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. "Victoria. What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you. To talk." Victoria's gaze flicked to Eve, polite but dismissive. "I've been traveling, thinking about us. About the mistakes I made. That was 3 years ago." Alexander's voice was carefully neutral. "We said everything that needed saying when you left. Did we?" Victoria stepped closer, and Eve caught the subtle scent of expensive perfume. "Because I've realized I was wrong. About leaving, about choosing my career over our relationship. About giving up on us." Eve watched the exchange like a spectator at a tennis match, noting the way Victoria positioned herself, the careful vulnerability in her expression, the practiced tremor in her voice. Everything about her screamed manipulation, but it was expertly done. "Victoria. I know this is unexpected. I know you've moved on." Victoria's eyes settled on Eve again, and this time there was calculation behind the politeness. "But I was hoping we could at least talk. As friends, if nothing else." Alexander looked torn, caught between his past and present. Eve understood. Victoria had been his first love, his first mate. That bond might be broken, but the history remained. "Maybe we should sit down," Eve said quietly. "I'll make more coffee." As she busied herself in the kitchen, Eve listened to the conversation in the living room. Victoria spoke about her time abroad, her successful art gallery in Paris, her gradual realization that she'd made a terrible mistake. It was a beautiful performance, full of just the right amount of regret and hope. And it was complete bullshit. Eve had spent 20 years reading people, learning to spot lies and manipulation. Every instinct she possessed screamed that Victoria was dangerous, but she couldn't prove it. "Not yet. I should go," Victoria said after an hour of careful conversation. "I don't want to cause any problems." "It's fine," Alexander said, though his voice was strained. "Maybe we can have lunch sometime. Catch up properly." Victoria's smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." After she left, Alexander sat in his chair looking like someone had hit him with a truck. "You okay?" Eve asked gently. "I don't know." Alexander rubbed his face. "I thought I was over her, over what we had. But seeing her again brought back memories?" "Confusion, mostly." Alexander looked up at Eve. "She was my first real relationship, my first attempt at building something lasting. When she left, it nearly destroyed me." Eve sat on the arm of his chair, her hand finding his shoulder. "And now she's back, claiming she made a mistake." "Yeah." Alexander leaned into her touch. "I'm sorry. This must be awkward for you." "I'm not worried about Victoria," Eve said, and realized it was true. "I'm worried about you. This has clearly shaken you up." "It has." Alexander's honesty was one of the things she loved most about him. "But it doesn't change anything between us. You know that, right?" "I know." Eve kissed the top of his head. "But maybe you should see her again. Get the closure you need." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Eve smiled, though something cold had settled in her stomach. "Besides, I'd like to get to know the woman who was important enough to almost destroy you." Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria became a frequent presence in their lives. She was charming, apologetic, and seemingly genuine in her desire to rebuild her relationship with Alexander. As friends, she insisted, nothing more. The pack welcomed her back with open arms, especially Alexander's grandfather, who'd always been fond of his grandson's first mate. "She's learned from her mistakes," the old wolf said during a family dinner at his estate. grown into the woman she was meant to be. Perhaps it's time to consider second chances. Eve watched Victoria work the room with practiced ease, noting how she touched Alexander's arm just a moment too long, how she referenced shared memories with casual intimacy, how she positioned herself as the wounded party who'd finally come home. Something's wrong with her, Eve told Alexander later that night. What do you mean? I mean she's lying about something. Maybe everything. Eve struggled to put her instincts into words. The way she tells stories, the timing of certain events, it doesn't add up. Alexander's expression grew troubled. You think she's running some kind of con? I think she's dangerous. I can't prove it, but every instinct I have is screaming warnings. Victoria isn't dangerous. She's many things, ambitious, sometimes selfish, maybe even manipulative, but she's not evil. Alexander's voice carried the certainty of long familiarity. I lived with her for 2 years. I know who she is. People change. Situations change. Eve tried to keep the frustration out of her voice. I'm not asking you to cut her off completely. I'm asking you to be careful. I am being careful. But Alexander's tone suggested the conversation was over. That's when Eve noticed Alexander was getting sick. It started small, fatigue that lingered longer than usual, a slight tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking. Within a week, he was struggling to get through full days at the office. Just stress, he insisted when Eve suggested seeing a doctor. The wedding planning, Victoria's return, the new business contracts. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. It got worse. By the 4th week, Alexander could barely stay awake past 8 o'clock. His usual supernatural healing seemed to have disappeared entirely. A small cut on his hand took days to close, and his enhanced senses dulled to barely human levels. That's when Victoria made her move. Alexander's clearly struggling, she said during a family meeting Eve wasn't invited to attend. Perhaps it would be best if I handled some of the business decisions while he recovers. Absolutely not. Eve's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. If anyone's going to take over Alexander's responsibilities, it should be me. With respect, Victoria's tone was perfectly reasonable. You don't have the necessary experience with pack politics or business management. I do. The family elders agreed. Victoria was given temporary authority over the pack's business interests while Alexander was indisposed. Eve found herself frozen out of meetings, denied access to financial records, and politely but firmly told her input wasn't needed. This is insane, she told Marcus during one of their clandestine meetings. She's poisoning him. That's a serious accusation, Marcus said carefully. Do you have proof? No. But I know what I see. Eve paced the small cafe where they'd met, her frustration boiling over. Alexander gets worse every day, and she gets more control. It's not a coincidence. Have you talked to Alexander about this? I've tried. He can barely stay conscious long enough for a conversation, and when he is awake, he insists Victoria would never hurt him. Eve's hands clenched into fists. She's got him convinced this is just some mysterious illness. What do you want me to do? Help me prove it. Get me access to his medical records, his food, something that will show what she's doing to him. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I'll see what I can do. But Eve? If you're wrong about this. I'm not wrong. Eve's voice was flat with certainty. Victoria is slowly killing the man I love, and no one will listen to me. 2 days later, Eve was evicted from the penthouse. For Alexander's health, Victoria explained with perfect concern. The doctor thinks he needs complete rest, and your presence seems to agitate him. It was a lie. Alexander had been asking for Eve constantly in his lucid moments, but the family supported Victoria's decision. Eve found herself standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. That's when she met Luke. He was waiting by the elevator when she emerged from the building, a tall man with kind eyes and an easy smile. When her suitcase wheels caught on the marble floor and sent her stumbling, he caught her elbow with gentle hands. Careful there. Moving out? Something like that. Eve's voice was bitter. Sorry, I'm not usually this clumsy. No judgment here. I'm Luke Morrison, I live on the 15th floor. His smile was warm, genuinely concerned. You look like you could use a friend. Over coffee at a nearby cafe, Eve found herself pouring out her story to this stranger who listened without judgment. Luke was a social worker, he explained, used to dealing with complicated family situations and power struggles. It sounds like you're being systematically isolated, he said when she finished. Classic pattern in abusive relationships. Alexander isn't abusive. Eve's defense was automatic. Not Alexander. Victoria. Luke's eyes were serious, compassionate. From what you're describing, she's using emotional manipulation and family pressure to control the situation. It's actually quite sophisticated. For the first time in weeks, someone believed her. Luke helped her find a small apartment across town, assisted with the paperwork, even helped her move her belongings. When she protested that he was doing too much for a stranger, he smiled and said he was just paying forward kindness he'd received during his own difficult times. As weeks turned into months, Luke became her anchor. He listened when she needed to talk, gave her space when she needed solitude, and slowly helped her rebuild her confidence. When Alexander's condition continued to deteriorate and the family blamed Eve's negative influence for his decline, Luke was there to remind her that she wasn't crazy. You see what others don't want to see, he told her during one of their evening walks. That's not a flaw, it's a gift. 3 months after being forced out of her home, Eve barely resembled the confident woman who'd fought her way out of Axel's compound. She was thinner, quieter, haunted by the knowledge that Alexander was dying and no one would let her help him. That's when Luke proposed. I know this is fast, he said, kneeling in her tiny apartment with a simple ring. But I've fallen in love with you, Eve. Your strength, your loyalty, your refusal to give up even when everyone's against you. Marry me. Eve stared at the ring, at this man who'd saved her from complete despair, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not love, she wasn't capable of that anymore, but gratitude deep enough to mistake for affection. Yes, she whispered, and tried to ignore how wrong the word felt in her mouth. The engagement was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to build something new from the ashes of her relationship with Alexander. Instead, it became a nightmare. Luke changed the moment she accepted his proposal. The kindness disappeared, replaced by a controlling possessiveness that made Eve's skin crawl. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her whereabouts, and flew into rages when she didn't conform to his increasingly specific demands. You're mine now, he said after a particularly violent argument about her refusal to cut her hair the way he preferred. You need to start acting like it. This isn't what I agreed to. Eve backed away from him, every instinct screaming danger. You agreed to marry me. That means you agreed to be the wife I need. Luke's smile was cold, calculating. Don't worry, you'll learn. That night, Eve discovered Luke had been photographing her, documenting her activities, and sending detailed reports to someone via encrypted email. When she confronted him, his mask finally slipped completely. Did you really think this was all coincidence? Luke's laugh was harsh, triumphant. Poor little Eve, so broken and desperate that she fell for the first man who showed her kindness. You bastard. Eve's voice was barely a whisper. I'm a professional, actually. This is what I do, identify targets, gain their trust, manipulate them into compliance. Luke gestured around the apartment like he was showing off his work. Though I'll admit, you were one of the more challenging assignments. Assignment? From my wife. Luke's smile was vicious. You remember Victoria, don't you? Tall, beautiful, currently in control of your boyfriend's empire while he slowly dies from the poison she's been feeding him? The world tilted sideways. You're married to Victoria. Business partners too. She handles the sophisticated cons, I handle the hands-on manipulation. Luke pulled out his phone, showed her a photo of him and Victoria at what was clearly a wedding. We've been running marks like this for years. Alexander. Will be dead within the week unless he gets proper medical treatment. Which he won't, because Victoria has convinced everyone that moving him to a hospital would be too stressful. Luke's voice was conversational, like he was discussing the weather. By the time anyone realizes what happened, she'll have transferred all his assets to offshore accounts and disappeared. Eve felt rage build in her chest, hot and clean and familiar. You're both going to pay for this. I don't think so. Luke reached for something behind his back, a syringe filled with clear liquid. See, you're going to have a tragic accident tonight. Distraught ex-girlfriend, couldn't handle the loss, decided to end it all. Very sad, really. Eve saw the needle coming and reacted on pure instinct. 20 years of training took over, muscle memory overriding months of isolation and manipulation. She caught Luke's wrist, twisted until bones snapped, and drove her knee into his solar plexus hard enough to lift him off his feet. You forgot something, she said as Luke gasped for air on the floor. I'm not just some broken victim you can manipulate. That's when the apartment door exploded inward and police officers flooded the room. Police. Nobody move. Detective Sarah Martinez, no relation to the Sarah Chin that Eve had killed in another lifetime, surveyed the scene with professional calm. Luke Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. As Luke was cuffed and dragged away, Detective Martinez turned to Eve. Ms. Chin. We've been watching Mr. Morrison and his wife for months. Your 911 call gave us the excuse we needed to move in. My 911 call? Eve was confused. I didn't call anyone. Emergency beacon. Detective Martinez held up a small device. Someone's been tracking you, keeping you safe. They activated it the moment Morrison pulled that syringe. Eve stared at the beacon, recognition dawning. Alexander. He's been having you watched since the day you were forced out of your home. Turns out your instincts about Victoria were right. She's been slowly poisoning him with a rare plant extract that mimics wasting diseases. We arrested her 20 minutes ago. Eve found Alexander in the hospital, pale and weak but alive. The doctors said the poison would clear his system within days now that they knew what they were treating. I'm sorry, he whispered when she took his hand. I should have listened to you about Victoria. Should have trusted your instincts. You were being poisoned. You weren't thinking clearly. Eve squeezed his fingers gently. I'm sorry too. For doubting us, for accepting Luke's proposal, for surviving. Alexander's voice was firm despite his weakness. You did what you had to do to stay alive and sane. I don't blame you for that. I don't love him. The words tumbled out in a rush. I never loved him. I was just so lost, and he seemed like a lifeline. Alexander's understanding was complete, unconditional. I know. And I know you love me, even when you thought I was lost to you. How? Because you never stopped fighting for me. Even when everyone said you were wrong, even when you were isolated and alone, you kept trying to save me. Alexander's smile was weak but genuine. That's not something you do for someone you've stopped loving. They were married 6 weeks later in a courthouse ceremony with Marcus and Detective Martinez as witnesses. No elaborate wedding, no family politics, just two people choosing each other with full knowledge of what that choice meant. Any regrets? Alexander asked as they exchanged simple gold bands. About the fancy wedding we planned? The big celebration? Eve considered the question seriously. None at all. This is perfect. Even after everything we've been through. The betrayals, the manipulation, the lies. Especially after everything we've been through. Eve's voice was steady, certain. We've seen each other at our worst, made mistakes, trusted the wrong people. But we're still here, still choosing each other. Even though trusting people is terrifying. Even though trusting people is terrifying. Eve smiled. Because some things are worth the risk. Alexander kissed her as the judge pronounced them married, and Eve tasted forever in that simple touch. They'd both learned that love wasn't about perfect people making perfect choices. It was about imperfect people choosing to trust each other despite every reason not to. Outside the courthouse, the city stretched before them, full of possibilities and dangers, chances and betrayals, all the messy complications of building a life together. But they faced it hand in hand, two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage was the willingness to believe in second chances. Even when those chances came wrapped in doubt and fear and the knowledge that trust was always a risk worth taking. Thank you for listening. Like, share and subscribe for more. Quick question. Did you see the initial visuals? Please comment below.